Okay, this is another attempt at an interview. We were going to do this maybe 15 minutes earlier, but we had a technical problem. I want to open with this just so anybody knows what might be causing this. We were hearing like just this kind of like random like uh, cracking sound in the microphone on my end. It sounds similar if you've ever worn headphones and then you've set off a bunch of static electricity from something like a sound. The chat was hearing it, tested cables, tested software settings. I rebooted the computer, which means I had to redo all these windows. That fixed it. And I have had this happen to me before. I've had to throw out recording sessions where I don't check, before I start recording. So if anybody knows what the hell caused that just one reboot fixed it all, please let me know, rosswsky@gmail.com. So that's how I'm starting this. But now we'll get to our actual guest. This is Sacor, a level designer. He reached out to me wanting to talk about first-person shooter design. And he also wanted to emphasize he's not a professional, so he's not an industry veteran. However, he has done some map work. And by coincidence, before this, I actually played through one of his, a mod that he made for Serious Sam 4. So he might be able to carry this conversation without me because he had an itinerary which I looked up and then forgot. So hopefully he has it in front of him for how he wants to kick things off. So yeah, we're going to be talking all about first-person shooter level and map design, that sort of thing.
Well, it's a pleasure to be on your stream and great to talk to you. And hello, chat. My name is Sirius Sacor. I'm hoping to become a level designer. I guess you could say I'm an aspiring level designer at the moment. I've spent a couple of years since about mid-2018 working on Serious Sam mods, starting with Serious Sam Fusion and then doing some things for Serious Sam 4. So after doing this for a couple of years, and I've wanted to branch out towards doing something more original, probably outside of Serious Sam, just because at this point I need a bit of a break. But I noticed that Ross had been doing a couple of video chats with a couple of guests about different topics, and first-person shooter level design, I've started playing a bit of a backlog that I have of games that I have yet to touch, and I just wanted to talk about some of my favorite level design, hear some of Ross's favorite level design, and also your favorite level design as well. We can figure out things that we really like about first-person shooters and what exactly really clicks with all of us, depending on what your taste is, of course. I think it'll be a pretty interesting conversation to have.
Yeah, this is the sort of thing where I'm hoping you're aware consciously of more things than I am. Because, sometimes I know I like something, but I don't know why. And I figured that level design might get into that territory. And yeah, also he was hoping to have I guess it depends on how many people we have, but he's hoping to have a question and answer session with the chat later. Speaking of the chat, somebody say something. I'm noticing it's not moving up, and that's making me paranoid because of the technical issues we had earlier. So yeah, what did you want to kick off first about with level design?
Oh, it looks like all the chat's here. Okay. Uh, well, I guess a good place to start, and this is going to be a question first directed towards you, and chat can, of course, certainly pitch in because I'd be curious to hear their answers as well. Just a little thing to note, because I know that you had, on your announcement, encouraged your viewers to talk about some of their favorite level design. So I do have that list in front of me on your YouTube announcement, and I thought that there were a lot of interesting answers there. But talk to me about some of your favorite levels that you've ever played in any first-person shooters. And it doesn't really have to be on any strict criteria, because I feel like we can talk about a couple of broad things that really go into the art of level design craft. But the things that stand out to you the most that you really enjoyed playing.
Yeah, it's varied for different first-person shooters because the style can be different. But I made a list of, well, actually, I'd have to think even more about like individual levels for some of these. But one of the ones that comes to my mind first off is from the original Far Cry and Crisis. Like I almost consider those the same game, just more. Uh, where I find one thing I like a lot is what I would call kind of a lightly linear or pseudo linear style, where you're kind of given an objective like off in the distance, and then how you get there is a little bit up to you. So you might go through a building, or you might go through some like trench or through a forest. And those games had a lot of that sort of thing where it your objective is on the other end of the island, and there's all this stuff in between. You can go more to the left or right. There might be an enemy patrol here, or a compound along here, or a
Hmm.
secret. So I kind of like it kind of guiding me a little bit rather than just here's open world, do whatever you want and aim. But at the same time, it's given me a lot of freedom. But let's get on my list. Well, I was thinking of some of my favorite first-person shooters, and the level design is part of that. Painkiller is way up there. That one has. I honestly don't even remember like the actual geometric layout of many of the levels, but in terms of the theme of it, it would it would be so varied from one level to the next. When you're in a train station, then you're in this giant Gothic cathedral, or like a lava pit. So actually, that is another aspect I noticed with some games. Let's see,
Hmm.
Sin is one of them, but let's see, I have a list, but now I'm like getting lost in my list. Well, I guess games. There's another good example I'm thinking of, but I guess to some extent Unreal, but ones where it feels like you're kind of traversing an area, so it kind of goes from like a city area to maybe outskirts to industrial, and it all kind of flows into one another. Like as you go through the levels, that's something I like a lot. So it kind of gives you a
Hmm.
sense of place as you're going through the game. Uh, for it, well, Serious Sam is Serious Sam. I feel like it's like the most uneven out of some of my favorite ones, but it also has like some of the most high. Oh yeah, that was the other. No One Lives Forever and Deus Ex has a bit of that feel to it, where you kind of feels like you're kind of going from one kind of a globe trotting feel, where you're seeing
Hmm.
lots of different places, but and then if you have cutscenes connecting it. But yeah, with Serious Sam, I would have to say that has some of my. Hold on, I think the chat is something on my end is like stalling the chat, so that yeah, it wasn't updating. I'm gonna have to keep. I can't take focus off of it. Okay. Uh, the what? Oh yeah, with Serious Sam, like some of the absolute high points I've had in first-person shooters come from that series, or just the a lot of the finale levels where you just see all these enemies just on the horizon coming at you by the hundreds, and you know. I think it's died down some, but for a while, everybody was using the phrase epic to describe everything. And I feel like Serious Sam actually lived up to like the classic definition of epic, where you go through those levels, and some of them it's just an experience. You almost feel like you were in like a bit of a battle with somebody coming at you. So I don't know how much of that has to do with the level design, aside from just having big, wide open areas and how the enemies are presented towards you. But uh, well, another one on the opposite end of the spectrum, I'd say my favorite probably be Fear, and that one's interesting because I feel like the levels in that are all relatively mundane. It's just a lot of office spaces and few industrial areas. However, I feel like there's two things that really make that click, that it's such a fond memory. One is the action is so over the top that you have particle effects and decals and chunks. Yeah, they have like bump mapping so that it looks like chunks are coming out of the wall and smoke. So that having this nice and orderly area before you go into a fight and seeing it actively destroyed around you, that creates a fondness in itself. And the other was, again, with the atmosphere, with the music and the lighting, they keep this really kind of tense, suspenseful tone to things, even when it is like just an office space at night. So
Hmm.
And I remember one of my favorite levels, though it's pretty contextual, in System Shock 2. The vast majority of that game is, just on a spaceship with corridors, and you're going to engineering and medical bay. Towards the end, you get launched into this, a bit of a spoiler if you haven't played it, you get launched in this alien growth that's encompassing the ship, and then you come out to that, and then all of a sudden, it's far more organic. You feel like you're going through like vessels, and it's like everything's kind of distorted, sort of like a capsized ship, where like chunks of the original ship are there, but most of it is this amorphous blob, and it's kind of confusing. So that level of contrast really jumped out at me because the entire rest of the game is not like that at all. So that one
Hmm.
stood out. So yeah, okay. I guess you go ahead if you have any questions or things I brought up. Or
I think there's definitely a lot of interesting picks, and based off of the different games that you've described, there's a very good variety of different kinds of first-person shooters that you've played, where the level design ranges from fairly linear to open-ended to the point where you can approach the situation in pretty much any way you do. Commenting a little bit about the Far Cry series, I've not played any of them, but
oh,
the one that I often hear referred to very affectionately on a nostalgic factor is definitely Far Cry 2, for a lot of its attention to detail, not just in terms of improving upon some of the mechanics from the first Far Cry, but also for the fact that it's just chock full of details, little gameplay elements that you don't seem to see in a lot of the newer ones, to my understanding. Um, I think one of my favorite things that I had seen out of a video on Far Cry 2, just talking about the differences between it and new Far Cry games, is the guy pulls out a rocket launcher and he fires it in this tall grass area, and the exhaust from firing the rocket sets the grass on fire and subsequently sets the player on fire. And it's just little things like that which really add up to the idea of first person shooter immersive sims and how far they had come up to that point. And it's kind of funny how in some cases it feels like it's kind of backtracked a little bit from that. Um, and not that Far Cry 3 was a bad game, but I think because it established such a popular format for the series, Ubisoft has just been trying to replicate that over and over again, and it feels very simplistic.
so did you say you haven't played the Far Cry games, or?
I've not. This is purely off of stuff that I've
Okay,
seen,
well,
so.
my opinion on it, I've only played a little bit of 2. The big thing that turned me off at 2 was I'm not kidding that I really disliked that tinting effect. And that one, they were heavy handed with the brown filter. So everything's a shade of
Mhm.
brown in that game. But I would say, yeah, I haven't played all of them, but my experience of Far Cry is that since 3, it's all essentially been the same game, just a different kind of skinning to it, which I don't know. It didn't wow me as much as some others, but have you played Crisis? It's
I have not. That's
oh
the game
okay.
that no
Well,
PC can run, to my understanding.
I would definitely recommend those. But the original Far Cry is not an open world one. It's lightly linear. You go from level to level,
Okay.
but again, let's like I described. That's another thing I'm fond of is games is sometimes seeing your actual objective in the distance, and then the level is essentially you getting there. Actually,
Mhm.
Serious Sam had some of that too. I enjoy that aspect also, but the
Oh, definitely.
so one is definitely different from the others. It's far more like Crisis, and I had another. Oh yeah, that was the other thing I was going to mention. Much more recent one, and I can't blame this one on the nostalgia, is the Killing Time, which I played like last year from the Doom era or a little bit after
Mhm.
around there. That one really surprised me because I really enjoyed 3/4 of the level design in that. I'm not a fan of the kind of old school like everything is a maze layout that you see in many like 90s first person shooters, but that one was different. You had the big wide open areas and branching paths, and this one leads to like a coastline on the island. This one leads to a mansion more inside. I really enjoy that sort of thing a lot. But,
Yeah, it comes from that interesting turning point of the era where games were trying to be a little bit less like Doom, and some of them were trying to uh, s- stretch their wings, essentially, going out to something that's a lot more to the point where it feels like a real physical world. I remember one of the things that you had shown in the Game Dungeon episode you had done on Killing Time was just the fact that when you start off on the ship and you're on this dockyard and it all feels like a physical, real place, just using a lot of simple shapes. And I definitely see a lot of that in some of the early 3D games as well. You talked about Sin, and I was actually catching up on the episode you did on that as well, because I remember that having some pretty remarkable stuff, especially given that it's just built on the Quake 2
oh
engine.
yeah,
I assume maybe slightly modified. I'm not sure how much that they did with the engine necessarily to achieve some of the effects that they did, but just looking on some of the footage that you had recorded, I really liked the level of detail they had went to try and make the places not only feel real and tangible, but just the fact that you look at something like a flat ceiling panel, which is like a fluorescent light, and you think that it's just part of the texture work, but no, you can actually shoot that and it breaks the light. And I'm just thinking, the amount of effort it would have taken to actually put all those little details into games like that from that time period, that it's just something that's really special to me that I really love in the craft of level design, which is that immersive sim factor. The same thing for games like Half-Life and Deus Ex. Deus Ex, regarding its more open-endedness with its level design, I'd say that's probably. I still have yet to beat it. It's been a while since I've had a chance to play it, and I kept on restarting playthroughs. One of the aspects that I really adore from that game is just the fact that you can approach a situation in many different ways. Liberty Island, the very first level in the game, is such a prime example of how to start a game like that off, where you can try pretty much any method you want. You can try being a stealth killer, or you could try going on a killing spree with your gun. I'm not sure if it'll be that successful, like you pointed out before. You could try hacking your way in. You can you could even just try doing a little bit of parkour. You could climb to the upper parts of the first building to try and break Gunther out of the security cell. There's just so many different ways that you can go about it until you can eventually reach the top. And I remember one of the things that I was really proud of being able to do was managing to somehow stealth my way through and knock out a minimal amount of guards without killing anybody. Not that I think that actually affects your performance, but it's just I really like it when games kind of give you that option and you just give yourself those little self-imposed challenges at times.
yeah. I was thinking about that earlier. I think you mentioned, or maybe in one of your emails, like, or I'm just hallucinating about the multiple approach thing and liking that. And a lot of people have mentioned that about the Deus Ex series and some others. And I realized what I think for me a key component of that is because I've seen that kind of put into other games or like with Human Revolution also. And I think a key component of that is don't make it too obvious. That's what you're doing.
Hmm.
Like have it the sort of thing where it just looks like scenery unless you're paying attention and really trying to mess with it. And then having that kind of discovery that you can do that, I think makes it better because one of the things I do like about games is like getting immersed in the world and feeling like this is real for whatever context they're giving me. So when it's real obvious the setup they're giving to you, then that can kind of wake me up a bit. And I think the original didn't do that much, whereas I think the second one, I mean, was it Human Revolution did that more. And I remember seeing a parody video where a guy was like they're telling him to like use a crate to get over it, and he picks up a crate and he put this texture on it where you can see like these two footprints like glowing on the top of the crate. Like you put your feet here, and so it's like the more it does that sort of thing, the more it feels like okay, this is a game, and it's kind of taking me out of the getting immersed in the world. Where like I think the developers have you have I think in order to make like the best level or experience, you have to be willing to let some players miss some things. You know that. So it's
I think a lot of that it does come down to some of that hand-holdiness and that you see in a couple of games now, at least. One of the things that I think about the most, and I critique this about Doom Eternal, yeah, it's just the fact that the game really wants to tell you how to do things from the very beginning with its tutorial system. Like, despite the fact that you can turn that off and try to negate that, it's also the fact that it's a game that constantly reminds you that it is a video game with the way that it's structured and designed, which I think it kind of took away from some of the elements that the previous game, Doom 2016, did, where it felt like this sort of tangible, realistic setting on the UAC on Mars and the Hell settings. It all felt like a real place, and it kind of drew you into the game very subtly. Whereas Doom Eternal's kind of the opposite of that. Um, but kind of sidetracked a little bit, I guess. If I wanted to mention talking, Sacor's talking about Eternal again. If I wanted to mention some of my favorite level design,
yeah.
to start with, well, Serious Sam, of course, being a game series that I played for over a decade now, I really like stages like Dunes and Land of the Damned from first and second encounter. Dunes, not so much for the strength of its design per se, but it's one of those levels that really emphasizes the spectacle aspect of Serious Sam, where you start off in that hilly area and enemies are just approaching you all around, coming over the main path, and then you climb up that hill and you just see the gates of Memphis right in front of you, and it's just this really majestic looking sight combined with the music. And then it's mostly just big arena battles, but it's something that definitely stands out as being one of the more memorable parts about the original Serious Sam game, and I think that's definitely an aspect that sticks with a lot of people as well. Land of the Damned, I picked that level because that's the one that feels like a miniature adventure in and of itself, and it's
Is,
probably one of the best.
is that the Christmas-ish one? Or
Yeah, that's the one where you start off in the snowy mountains and then you enter this giant series of lava caverns, where it then culminates with you teleporting to this massive ice skating rink with a big castle in the
yeah, the
center.
ice
Uh,
palace like in the distance, kind of. Yeah. Okay.
yeah, it's just one of the most adventurous levels in the series, and I think one of the best penultimate stages in any first-person shooter I've ever played, because it pretty much emphasizes all of the core strengths that I see in the first Sam games. That feeling of adventure. It feels like this big expedition, and you don't quite know where you're going, but everything feels very magical and mystical, and the scale of the level with the snowy mountains off in the distance towering above you. Like you feel like you're in this very secluded place that has a lot of mystery to it. And I think that's just one of those things that really, really helps Serious Sam stand out as a classic shooter compared to other games which were much smaller in scale.
Well, when I talk about Serious Sam being uneven, I was thinking one of my favorite levels from two, and then I realized, oh wait, that's right, I hated the first part. And then the one with the Mayan temples, you know, in that big valley, you know, where you have to go from temple to temple, and the area is huge. Except before that, you have to go through these kind of platforming jumping puzzles. And even though while the giant
Yeah,
cavern looks awesome, I like that. I remember not really enjoying the platforming that's flinging me around for that where I can kind of mess up and fall to my death easily. But then you open up into that giant valley, and I love that. Yeah, I'm all about spectacle in like especially in shooters. You know, trying to like wow me with the environments of the level. Actually,
Yeah,
another one I
Valley of
was
the Jaguar is that
yeah,
stage.
that's the one I'm thinking of. Yeah,
And I agree as well because I think that's one of the things that Classic does better, where you start off in this cave, which is very plain, and then you eventually reach this giant valley, and that's a really big wow factor to suddenly see this giant space in front of you with various different temples, and they all feel like miniature adventures, each area you're going to and exploring.
I'd say all of them kind of have that. Maybe three has it the least for me, but the yeah, because for first encounter the dunes, when you see the temple, that's also that area where you see a lot of enemies coming at you from a very far distance away. Just you see them just on the horizon. It's you start firing because they're probably not going to reach you until 30 seconds or a minute later. But there's so many, you should start firing now.
Yeah.
Like the yeah, well, too, like the Grand Cathedral at the end, the kind of gauntlet aspect of it. Well, the
Hmm.
first one, the end levels, the end level is pretty amazing for spectacle, or I guess technically the second to last one, where first they throw you in an arena, but that part of it was just sort of okay to me. But then you're open on this long walk to the Great Pyramid, and these enemies keep coming at you, and then while you're doing that, oh geez, I forget the order now, but if you like manage to look back, you see the gigantic UFO coming in the distance while that's happening, and then the main boss comes at you later. That he's just utterly enormous, easily the biggest enemy in the game at this point that you've seen. Like
He's
the
just
size of
crushing the previous arena behind you and knocking down all of the walls,
yeah,
slowly
yeah.
stomping towards you.
Yeah, it's building up that anticipation, like this gigantic enemy you're seeing in the distance. This would have been in the skybox of older games, and it's coming at you slowly. Like I love that sort of thing.
Hmm.
And yeah, well, four. I think. Well, I mentioned. I think my favorite part of four was the breakfast in France level, where you've gone through the Italy level, and I mean the levels, and those are impressive, but kind of standard Serious Sam. And now it's just like this gigantic open valley of, rural France that you need a motorcycle to get around because it's so large, and you're stopping at basically making a giant road trip. They turn the game into this big road trip of a level. And seeing it open up, and then like this pleasant music is playing, and you're starting at the top of a hill, and I don't know, it's nice.
Yeah, Breakfast in France is an interesting toss-up for the community because I feel like half of it really likes it because of just that again, the sheer scale that you
Yeah,
suddenly see in this map that's 128 by 128 kilometers in size in game, and you're thinking, well, where the hell am I supposed to go now? And the other half of the community, I think, really doesn't like the level a lot because, for the most part, it's a lot of flat areas and terrains, and the battles themselves, you can probably skip a lot of them if you just want to go around. And yeah, as someone in the chat is saying as well, you really only play about 5% of it, which
oh yeah, yeah,
um
they don't really make use of that 128 by 128 kilometers other than just visual background. I mean, they have a secret at the end of. I mean, if you follow the road, you're seeing what 95% of it or something like that.
mhm. Yeah, I think it would have been an interesting experiment had they committed to decorating the level with more things that you could do, kind of making it this interesting non-linear adventure. I still don't think that it's quite the strength of Serious Sam level design. I think it's one of the weakest examples in terms of level design, if only because it's very highly exploitable and there isn't very much anything interesting you could do mechanically. It's more so you're kind of there for the aesthetic that you're in you're in rural countryside France. So it feels like a little bit of an interesting road trip, like you say. Um, but to switch gears from Serious Sam for a little bit, because I had a couple more
Yeah, sure.
levels that I wanted to mention from different games. Uh, Doom 3 is it's going to be a really odd pick. It's my favorite Doom game in the whole franchise. And well, I don't think that it's got the most varied level themes, and not really got the most stimulating gameplay either. Towards the end of the game, when you're kind of in that final quarter, is when I feel like it really starts to pick up and get more engaging. Starting once you get teleported into hell, and it's like it's nothing like you've ever seen in the game before, where it really does feel like this very dark, phantom place, fire and brimstone playing up every aspect of like stereotypical hell, and you're venturing through this, not really sure what the level's gonna do next, and it's just got a lot of fun scares, a couple of cheap shots I remember with some of the placement of the Hell Knight enemies. And I also really like the caverns sections as well, leading up towards the end of the game, where you're traveling to this old Mars dig site, and you're taking this massive cargo elevator down into the old areas, and the place is just, it feels like an active volcano with the way that it's set up. It just all feels very dangerous and in some spots still a little bit spooky, kind of maintaining the very loosely described as horror elements of Doom 3 that kind of make you feel a little bit insecure and you don't have a safe place to stand. Um, Really, I think games like Doom 3 and Half-Life kind of fill this niche for me, which I find is very difficult for other games to pull off. It's this, you're inside this massive base and you have to escape at all costs. Like this claustrophobic style of game and level design, where it feels like the objectives just get the hell out of there. The game's trying to throw
Well,
every possible trick it can at you to
well,
discourage you.
the overwhelming feeling, the number one game for me that gives me that feeling would actually be Half-Life, the original. Because
Yeah,
trying to escape,
easily.
I mean, at the time, and even though I've sort of fried some of my brain on it, but that was overwhelmingly the feeling I remember. It's like yeah, you're trying to escape this massive facility. I think actually, I think now that I think about it, Doom 3 might be my favorite out of all of them too. Uh, though
Hmm.
I wasn't really okay. Maybe my memory is hazy on it. I wasn't actually that wowed by the hell level because, I mean, it's very dark, so I couldn't see a lot. And then I just remember a lot of it being just kind of like rocky corridors or lava, and then the enemies. So it's like, I don't know. I found the more interesting parts of that game, like the later sections of the Mars base, you know, where you're kind of where you they're letting out all the enemies and you're seeing the trash labs. And then I think like later when you
Hmm.
come back from hell, you're seeing some of like the archaeological dig, and then like I don't know. I like seeing the sort of fusion of the technical aspect of the futuristic base versus the hell stuff corrupting things where you know you have
Oh yeah,
fleshy
I love
blobs,
that
and
as well.
I like that
I
mix
think
of it, you know. So,
I think the level is like either CPU labs or central processing, which comes shortly after you've returned from hell first. And there's these parts where you're just traveling across the base and these corridors start falling apart in these little cinematic sequences, revealing hell kind of seeping into the area, which just leads to a lot of fun little moments and visuals that really help stand out. And again, I think the last 25% of the game is probably at its best with Doom 3. It's kind of a bit of a slow burn at the very beginning, though I think the I'll give a shout out to Mars City Underground as well as an introductory level where that's where everything goes wrong and the invasion starts because you travel through the level first and it's a walking simulator. Everybody is kind of on edge and you get to talk to NPCs, but they mostly shoo you away. And then you're traveling back through it and it's just getting messed up by all the zombies, all the imps, and they're breaking the place apart, and it feels like everything is about to collapse on top of you. The radio chatter going off in the background.
well,
It's just a great way to draw the player in, I think.
it is good, and I'm in no means knocking it for that, but Maybe one did it before, but Half-Life for sure popularized that approach first. I mean,
Hmm.
that it came first, and I'd say it did it even more extensively than Doom 3 because the first couple levels you're just going in, getting acclimated, which was not this was not a normal thing for first-person shooters at the time, which mostly just dump you in and immediately start firing. But
Hmm.
and then you're going back through those same levels for the first couple, if I remember. And I had
Yeah,
another
I don't
thought.
think Doom 3 was designed for its narrative strength of a Series 7. It did definitely follow the trend that Half-Life had established, which, as a lot of games fail to really realize that Half-Life was kind of written around those set pieces, and you can't just throw set pieces for the sake of having set pieces. There kind of has to be a reason for it to happen. Uh, Typically, having a writer on board kind of
Oh,
helps with that, I think.
you mentioned, I guess to give a differing view, you mentioned Doom 2016 and Eternal. And from my perspective, it's almost like, oh, I see a little bit of a difference. They're still in like a different category of kind of what I like. Whereas like it bugged me, something bugging me about those for a while. Then I finally figured out what it is. In my opinion, those are not like pure first person shooters. Those are hybrid games, kind of like the way Deus Ex is a hybrid first person shooter RPG. It really is kind
Hmm.
of both. It's not, if you go in there expecting like a lot of good shooting, you're going to be disappointed because that's not really that's only like half of the game really. Or less than half, depending on how you play it. But with Doom, it's half first-person shooter, half I don't even know what subgenre to call it, but sort of like a combo game where they want you to set something up so that you complete it to finish the sequence. Because that game, both those games, absolutely want you doing kind of melee kills to finish the enemies, like far and away. In fact, I'm not even sure how possible it is to play through both of them without doing constant melee kills. But
With Doom 2016, I think, sorry to interject,
no,
I
go ahead.
think that it's much easier to stop using the melee kills after the first couple of levels, once you get a couple of the skill points and you're more acclimatized to the shooting. Whereas with Eternal, it's more based around recovering resources because they limit the amount of ammunition that you can carry. And because the enemies are really fast, you're encouraged to engage in melee more as little pauses between the combat so you can keep going. It's definitely an interesting way to design a first-person shooter as a hybrid, I guess you could call it in your terms. It's not my favorite, of course, but
Well,
uh,
and
definitely an interesting experiment.
and you mentioned the difference between 2016 and Eternal. I mean, I guess there is. To me, it wasn't even that huge from what I was seeing, though I kind of gave up on Eternal after a point. But I watched a playthrough of some of the remainder. The Even in 2016, I was noticing a lot of the level layout. I was thinking this feels like a small deathmatch level, like the way they have things set up with a platform here, platform here. Some of the levels do feel more like a real place, but others it's like I'm as a gamer, I'm seeing deathmatch kind of abstract level where you can put your power up here, have some columns here to escape routes and steps. I was seeing that first and some sort of facility a far second, or especially when it gets to hell, it's like I'm seeing like a hell level like far second. I'm seeing just this is screaming to me this is a small deathmatch level. Something about
Mhm.
the layout were in my mind that I'm seeing. I think Doom
Oh yeah, I think
3
that was
much more feels like some sort of space base,
mhm.
with whatever the level layout is doing.
Yeah, with 2016 and Eternal, it was definitely more deliberate to have the level design based more around being like these miniature arenas. Eternal especially feels more like a multiplayer deathmatch arena style game. The breaks that you have between those arenas, for the most part, are these parkour sections. You don't get a lot of spaces where it just feels like a corridor shooter. I'd say that Doom Eternal is very much an anti-corridor shooter and purely engages in the arena shooter format that I I'm not sure which game would have popularized it the most, but Often I would be more comfortable calling them like painkiller likes or painkiller spin-offs, which kind of take the premise of painkiller but take it to extremes,
You
if
think
that makes
Eternal is
sense at
more like
all.
Painkiller or
Um, no, I'd say that 2016 is probably a little
2016?
more like
Man,
painkiller, whereas
that
Eternal,
feels. I mean, maybe design wise, because I don't know. I mean, for level design wise, because to me, Painkiller is like towards the top tier of first-person shooters I like, and I wasn't really liking the style of the newer Doom and Doom Eternal because, well, I mean, I don't know how much of that comes down to the level and how much is just the mechanics, the actual firing. Because
I would
Painkiller,
say it'd be more the case of mechanics than it would be strictly level design. Um, but because when I say painkiller, like it has more to do with the structure of you walk into this area, it's a big arena, you have to clear out all the enemies, move on to the next area.
yeah.
Now, granted, I've not played Painkiller yet. I mean to
Oh,
play the first
really?
game at some point.
Oh, yeah.
So
Okay.
yeah, it's definitely on my to-do list of retro shooters.
Oh,
I guess we
yeah,
could call it
yeah.
a retro shooter
That's
now.
You'll be curious seeing your reaction. I introduced Painkiller to a friend of mine who was looking for a game, and he played it. It was like this. This is what I was looking for. The game's just fun. None of this extra crap. It's just like he was. So apparently that scratched that. I really haven't seen as much of much of a successor to Painkiller that much. I mean, Painkiller, yeah, the mechanics are very different, I would say, from the newer Dooms. Because, like, with the newer Dooms, when you shoot an enemy, it almost reminds me of Mortal Kombat, where, you know, it's like finish him and they kind of get staggered. And if you wait, I think they come back again. So, from my perspective, it almost felt like I was like chopping down a tree trying to kill the enemy. And like with a first person shooter, in my mind, the emphasis is on the shooting, you know, get if it's a tough enemy, then bring out a heavy gun. Most enemies, just a few shots should be all it takes. It's like so with Painkiller, it's going to be much more kind of yeah, a few shots and the enemy go down. They're giving you plenty of ammo to deal with the situation. I mean, I would say it's closer to like the arena, not as huge, but closer to the arena style of Serious Sam games to give you a reference than it
Mhm.
is to Doom. But yeah, you do sort of move forward progressively, but like each level is its own thing. I mean, it's you, you're, it's almost. I'm trying to think how to explain it, but like each environment is very different, has its own theme. One of them, you're going through this kind of medieval village. Another one, you're going through an opera house. Another one, you like giant warehouses. Another one's just like this huge snowy bridge. So you're kind of the idea is I think they're well the story wise it's pretty anemic, but it's the idea is you're going through the afterlife, so they're just kind of representing different areas, and I think they're just using an excuse to have like a different theme for every level with what you're seeing, and I like the kind of fantastic element to it.
Hey, if that's the excuse they're using for you to go to these various different locations, I mean, credit where it's due. That's a good way to go about it, especially if Painkiller's strength seems to be just not only the spectacle in terms of its level layout. I recall some people commenting um, in your YouTube announcement, people had mentioned the Opera House, and I think I'd seen some footage of the Opera House before, where it's just massive. This entire you can explore every nook and cranny of it, to my understanding, as well, which I think I think that's kind of a funny detail about the kind of game that it's set out to be, that you can pretty much go anywhere inside these massive layouts of these realistic looking locations. Um,
I think they
if
do
I were to
kind of
double
fence you
back a
off,
little
but it
bit,
sort of opens up as you go. But
yeah,
it's
that's kind of based off of killing the enemies, isn't it? Because
yeah, no, I
of
mean I
its
think they'll like
arena-like
literally even have
structure.
gates that open up once you've yeah, it is once you kill the enemies in the area. That aspect of it isn't why I like it though. It's more like if they had
Mhm.
all the enemies at once and I just had to go through and discover them, like that would be fine with me. So it's not again, I guess it's about the spectacle and like good shooting mechanics and that sort of thing. They give you plenty of tools for the job in that one. So.
Hmm.
I guess I should ask you on the other end of the spectrum. What's your attitude towards games? I guess like something ones that are like a little more realistic, like maybe Stalker, or the more extreme degree, something like I guess like Delta Force or Arma. Well, that I haven't even played much of those, but or DayZ, I guess would be.
I've not played any ultra realistic shooters or ones which are trying to be as grounded as possible. The closest I probably tried was probably uh what was the name of that game? It was a out of the Metro series, and I probably still have it in my list.
I still need to go through those.
I'll
Yeah,
double check. Metro 2033, that was the one. Yeah, I did try that a little bit, and I think the thing that really turned me off wasn't so much that it was like I like the way that it was establishing the world where you're inside this giant tunnel system, and if you're going out to the surface, it's supposed to be really dangerous. Um, but then I got to like the first shooting section where you're kind of having the standoff with a couple of goons from an enemy faction inside this dark tunnel, and it just felt really weird and awkward. And I know it must have been an early point of the game, but I just thought I can't get into this. I don't think this is the kind of game that I want to be playing. Like very deliberately slow-paced first-person shooters where it's more about outsmarting enemy opponents, I don't think is really in my wheelhouse. I think
yeah.
I much more prefer the heavily action-oriented games, which is probably why I gravitate more towards arena-styled shooters. I'd say like the slowest game that I have played and I intend to beat at some point is Deus Ex, and I definitely want to play Human Revolution afterwards as well. I'm interested in seeing that one too. Um,
I'm curious with somebody in the chat. Urban Human said Painkiller is too simple. You know, I will say when I was playing Painkiller, it made me almost hungry for something with narrative afterwards. Like it's almost like part of my brain was screaming out, like, "Yeah, you need like maybe you should play like an adventure game with like a real plot and story and lots of." It did make me hungry for that. I'm not sure if that's what they mean, but I, Fear is another one way up there. Maybe I'm curious what some examples of games that they like. Urban Human in the chat here, if they think Painkiller's too simple,
mhm.
I'm wondering what's more their speed. There'll be some delay before they can answer, but yeah, because Fear is less simple, but it's. Well, yeah, have you played Fear or?
I've seen Civi's video on Fear. That was kind
Oh
of
man,
the
you really should.
first
I
exposure that I
really
had to
recommend
it.
playing that one. I don't think you'll be disappointed on the action. I mean,
But
it's one of those that
if
kind
the
of
description
builds.
is that it's kind of like you're playing a John Woo movie where you get the bullet time and you get to slow down everything, and the emphasis with the enemy AI being very artificially smart. Uh, Technically, they're
See, I
not
feel
all
like
working
you've been.
together, but you've got this illusion that they're working together. It looks cool.
See,
It
I feel
definitely looks
like
like one of those
you're saying this
stylistic
not having
shooters.
played it. I almost feel like you're being done a disservice watching a video talk about the game, and now you have your opinions laid out from that video. Because you know I mean, you say artificially smart. If you didn't know that going in, you're thinking. I mean, in my opinion, it's in terms of how it played, it's some of the best AI I've seen in a first-person shooter. Who cares if it's artificial if the end result is that like, okay, I don't even know if I imagine this, but I think I did see it. I remember when I first played it, you know, I see an enemy at the sort of room across from me, and I shoot at him and I hit him a little bit. So he backs off and takes cover behind a crate. So then we have kind of a standoff where I'm waiting for him to pop out. So he does pop out to get a couple shots in. And then I hit him again, but I still haven't killed him. And then, okay, maybe I imagine this, but that's how impressive the AI was if I did. What I remember
Mhm.
next is him blind firing after that. So I shot him once, he gets behind the crate. I shoot him again, him popping up. Now he's blind firing at me. I was thinking, I don't think this was like a scripted sequence. This was just like, okay, the AI is working with the nodes it has around it that react from that. Maybe the chat
Hmm.
can confirm, can myth bust whether they will do that or not, because I don't remember. It's been a while.
Yeah, when I say that the enemies are artificially smart, by no means is that something I say to detract from the experience. It's the fact that you are given this illusion that all these enemies are working together to take you down is very visually impressive, and I think that's a big factor as to why people really adore that game in retrospect. I've been told that no other game has ever managed to do it quite as well, but I'd be interested to see if any other game could get even close to that. Some people in the chat are saying Trepang 2. Not
This one I
familiar
still
with
need to
that one.
play. Yeah.
Hmm.
Let's see. I'm trying to see if
Yeah,
the
definitely. Like talking about the level design in Fear itself is that it's definitely a lot of offices and a lot of corridors, but you kind of don't really care about that too much because the shooting itself is largely what's carrying you through the experience. It's definitely not a first for games to not necessarily have the most varied kind of level design, but the level design itself really lends itself towards the strengths of the shooting and the gameplay. And Fear sounds like it's pretty high up
have
there.
you okay? It's not a first-person shooter, but have you played Max Payne?
I have not,
Okay,
no.
well,
But
it's not
I'm
a
aware
first.
that
I
it
was gonna
was
say
an influence.
that was the first game that really made me just kind of like wow me as far as the you're seeing your destruction in the process of shooting. You know, where you have particle
Hmm.
effect. Yeah, I was thinking there's been some kind of like landmarks when you were talking about like with Sin the light that you can shoot out. One of the earlier ones I remember first person shooter were decals, so that you can have a lot of bullet holes in the walls that showed, where you can kind of see your destruction. I first remember seeing that in a big way in Half-Life, though I can believe it wasn't the first to do that. But oops, I have the chat paused by accident. Uh, well, I feel like you shouldn't form too strong an opinion about a game that you haven't played though, unless you can see just from the gameplay that this isn't your thing. That's different because you can determine a game is not for you just from looking at it. If it like you said, you want more action oriented stuff, but if you're going by one guy's opinion, you may have the same one, but it's kind of prepping you. I don't know. To me, I'm almost seeing this like it's giving you groupthink before you've even tried it to form your
That's
own
fair,
opinion.
yeah.
Like, because I was when I did the again not first person shooters when I did the Dungeon Siege video, I did see in like every kind of walkthrough and guide that they mentioned, oh, you should have certain magic users in your party. And I found like, no, this is more fun without the magic users. I want them going in there swinging or shooting. It's faster, and I beat the game like that. So that's not necessarily something. I've noticed that effect on the internet. Where if one person says kind of definitively, "This is how it is," everyone falls in behind that. So it's I mean, unless you played it and have that. In my opinion, it's almost he almost did you a disservice by you watching that video because you had kind of the magic ruined for you. And like you said, you can say it's artificial, and I mean, I would say it's similar to like what Half-Life does or Half-Life 2 rather, with the node. I know
Hmm.
that because I've worked in the source engine, so I see how it works with AI nodes for behavior at this point, and it looks for different. But in terms of the persuasiveness of it, I mean, I haven't seen it. I have not seen a game that wowed me on the same level since then.
Hmm.
The chat's welcome to suggest games that maybe come close, and I don't think that's a technology limitation because that was made in what, like mid 2000s. So I don't know. It might just be where effort is focused, that sort of thing. Because I mean, something like Serious Sam or like the arena, the AI is pretty basic, but what makes it a fun is that it makes it up for it in numbers, with how
Hmm.
much comes at you. But okay, we should probably move to more in your itinerary, which I don't have in front of me, I guess.
Yeah, of
But
course. Well, I mean, just talking about how some of the art direction and environment design really plays into it. Um, from a perspective of somebody who wants to actually design original levels, and I've experimented with some serious sound levels over a while in my latest project, really trying to play to the environments the way that they're built and having the enemies look like they're interacting with that environment to make for some more interesting set pieces. I'd say that just to tie this back to some more of my favorite level design before, I know that System Shock 2 is often said by many to be superior to BioShock in a lot of ways. However, I will say that BioShock thematically is probably has the benefit of being a little more attractive for its unique art style and setting, which probably is part of what really popularized it. And I think because of that, it makes some of the levels in that game stand out a lot more in terms of variety. Like when you start out in not like the intro sequence, but the first actual hub-like area, which is the medical pavilion, which kind of teaches you about the game's mechanics and introduces you to a lot of its basic weapons. And you're hunting down this crazy surgeon named Dr. Steinman. Um, I think that one stands out to me just in terms of its strengths of being able to show the player what they can and can't do in a fairly short time frame, while also really building up the atmosphere of this place being kind of spooky. And you get a lot of fun little scares and moments of the splicers basically attempting to trick you and fool you. And I'd say the second best out of that would probably be Fort Frolic, where you're made to believe that you're just kind of passing through this place, and then Sandra Cohen cuts off your contact with Atlas, and you're forced to explore basically this giant underwater shopping mall, and you can approach pretty much every shop and stall in whatever order that you want to, which I do like the open-endedness of that, but also the fact that it does give the game a good excuse to again try and shock you and scare you in a couple of places, not just in terms of the way that the character like Sandra Cohen is written, but also there's a moment in there where you're going into this water-filled store, like it's very waterlogged at the bottom, and there's just a bunch of mannequin dummies just ominously laid out in that spot. So you go to the other end because there's a plasmid pickup that you can get. You pick it up and you turn around, and then some of the mannequins have transformed into like these frozen plastered covered enemies which only start attacking you once you get close to them. It's those little moments like that that really helped draw me into that game.
Yeah, I don't know. I might be too biased to give a better opinion because I played System Shock 2 first, and
Hmm.
th- I wasn't looking at it from a map design perspective though, but so much of it felt like a watered down version of what was already in System Shock 2. And I mean, with the
Watered
story, like,
down.
okay, you mentioned like the waterlogged mall. Well, they had something like that in System Shock 2. The same plot point where you get cut off. They had something like that in System Shock 2. It follows
Oh,
all the same
interesting.
beats. I mean, it did have the benefit of having a more budget and to work with, and of course, years have passed in graphics. They could. You see, the reason it kind of caught on. I think that has more to do with it was a multi-platform release where they had a lot more marketing behind it. I mean, there were TV ads for it. The System Shock 2 did
Hmm.
not have TV ads that I'm aware of. It was just on PC, so it was a much smaller audience. So this was a lot of people who had never seen System Shock 2, so they didn't have the reference. Like actually, one thing I was thinking of is kind of a tangent, but I was thinking I've seen Jurassic Park and I've seen Jurassic World. I personally think Jurassic Park is a much better movie. However, Jurassic World is much more successful, I think, financially. Well, if you had never seen Jurassic Park, you might think Jurassic. I could see where you'd be wowed by Jurassic World. I guess. But for Bioshock, actually, I'd say while the gameplay didn't really grab me that much from a level design perspective, I thought Infinite was much more impressive and something I hadn't seen on that level before. Have you seen much of Bioshock Infinite, or
I did play through Infinite. I'm trying to remember if I played through it at least once or twice. And I will say that both art style wise and in terms of the sheer scope that you see of the game, where instead of it being this claustrophobic underwater city, it's this giant open, sort of 1920s American style floating sky fortress. I thought that was really cool visually, but I think that it has the drawback of being a much more, I have to use the term watered down here, and I hate the pun because it's Bioshock related.
yeah, well, I did it.
Mechanically, it's so watered down,
Yeah,
and I don't think that that helps the replay value
the
at all.
gameplay.
Uh,
I wasn't defending the gameplay, but if we're just talking
oh
levels
yeah,
and maps, then I think that has a lot going for it. With that,
there's a lot of potential there, I will say,
okay,
and I
okay,
think that had there been a different direction for what the material was there, they could have done something incredible with that.
let me bring up something that Serious Sam absolutely does this, and now that I think about it, maybe Bioshock Infinite did as well, and I've seen this in other
Mhm.
games. And maybe you can talk some about this as a little designer. I've noticed in many first-person shooters, when we have these like spectacular outdoor environments, that you're thinking like, well, you mentioned dunes and Serious Sam, and talking about Bioshock Infinite, like those are awesome. And it almost feels like a punishment when I have to go back indoors into some level that's kind of like a little mundane and it's just some hallways. Like in Serious Sam, what it was even more stark. I generally hated most of the indoor levels in Serious Sam, whereas I liked almost all the outdoor levels. And I've seen that in a few games. Is there like is that just a personal preference thing, or is that something you've noticed in some other games, or do you think there might be a psychological reason for that? Or
Psychological reason I would say is pretty valid if we're talking about Sam, because it was one of the earliest examples where a first-person shooter was not taking place inside these brown, dimly lit corridors that a lot of other shooters were going for at the time. To give a bit of credit to some of the build engine games, and well, just a disclaimer, like I've tried playing a build engine game before. I just had a difficult time playing. Like I felt like my eyes were glazing over, and I almost felt a little bit motion sick almost with the way that the movement is in the games. So that was unfortunately a slight turnoff for me. I will say that they often come up from in terms of the strengths of level design for the fact that a lot of them tend to do the little interesting tricks that were really impressive for the tech, or you'll often have these levels where they kind of loop back on themselves. So you start from one area, you might have several different paths you can take, or you might find a door that eventually opens up and you find yourself back at the starting area, and you can kind of mentally map out where you've been, and you can see all the ways that everything is connected together. And I think that that's definitely something that is I wanted to see more of that replicated in some of the early 3D shooters, and I feel like games like Sin, from what I can understand, kind of did a pretty good job of that. Even Half-Life 1 did a good job of that in some areas
yeah,
too. In terms of the open stuff, though, because one of the things that I think helps with really open first-person shooter worlds is that, and not necessarily open world per se, you do have to find ways to set some artificial boundaries or design the enemies so that way it doesn't just feel like a lot of flat shooting. And I think the variants where you have these little breaks so that way you have to go indoors or you have to go into a place that's much less open is kind of necessary so that way it kind of recharges your brain a little bit and
oh,
it
I
lets
see.
you appreciate the spectacle without having you to necessarily put up with the spectacle because it's not the most strong gameplay wise always, if that makes sense at
Yeah,
all.
no,
Like
I get what you're
level design
saying. Kind of.
variance is kind of a difficult thing, I think, especially for games like Serious Sam. If I had a choice in the matter, I would want it so that way you could have this even flow and this even balance of having these more enclosed areas, then you open up to bigger areas, medium-sized areas. You have different arenas, maybe with some verticality or a special kind of gimmick, like what the second encounters levels do. Or occasionally you have those little gimmick rooms to kind of offset just the basic corridors or the big open areas. But that's my take on it.
I hadn't considered that. That if I don't, I may not like. Well, some indoor areas are awful, but the levels. But no, You're right. That could be like a necessary step to reset my brain. I hadn't considered that.
Hmm.
And then the outdoor stuff might get stale. I don't know though. I mean, yeah, no, there might be something. Although I was thinking in Deus Ex, it varied, but I was thinking some of the indoor areas and those I liked a lot more because I remember liking like the subway stuff a lot, but that was so big it almost might have been a little bit like an outdoor area in my brain. I mean, going into UNATCO was kind of nice, but then the music's so good and the atmosphere is different. So
Well, it's interesting that you comment on that. If we want to talk a little bit about Deus Ex in this case, because it's kind of reaching a different signal in your brain that's telling you what you really like. Context definitely matters in environment design for first-person shooters. And so when the context changes, you kind of know what it is you're going to be facing. Not only does it help immerse you inside that world, but it also it makes you appreciate things like those smaller interior sections that in another game you wouldn't really be so fond about. And maybe that's because Deus Ex is kind of playing more to the strengths of that in particular. Um, if I were to use that as a frame of reference, like you mentioned, the subway system underground where there's like this big homeless encampment happening inside. Um, yeah, I'd say part of it is just because setting is the thing that's really driving Deus Ex. You want to know more about what's going on in this world, that even like these grungy rundown spots, that's a big part about what plays into Deus Ex's narrative. So you want to discover and understand what's going on, not only in terms of the story, but you also want to see what kinds of things could be hiding down here that might benefit me for the journey up ahead. Like, can I find some secret items, or maybe there's a locked door here or a safe that I can crack? Little things to kind of draw you in and keep you engaged. So
actually,
that's probably why you're seeing that effect.
yeah, no, that I hadn't thought of that, and I'm aware of that in other ways because of well, mentioned Doom 3. That was actually one of my criticisms of that is as a scary game, in my opinion, you need to have breather spots somewhere in order to be most effective. Where you go through something terrifying, and then you have like a little bit of a break, like a cutscene or just like a calm area to get your bearings before you go back out. And like with the Resident Evil series would have these save rooms where this nice calm music is playing.
Hmm.
The enemies can't get you. You can organize your inventory, save your game, and I feel like having that like really helps for scary games. And Doom 3, from what I remember, didn't really have that. It's like, well, part of this is probably engine limitation, but it seems like it's like always dark except for like one or two lights. And it's always that tone. And no, you make a really valid point that you kind of have to like reset your brain with something. I feel like there's examples where I could think of where the indoor stuff is still a lot of fun. It's just I'd say on average, though, it seems like the outdoor areas tend to be more fun for me. But well, mention what's
Well,
what? Go ahead.
I was going to say, because I know that you've not played the Black Mesa remake of Half-Life, and I
I
understand
I
why.
played up until the tentacle monster, and then I was just like, yeah, this feels
Okay,
like work.
okay.
Like,
Yeah, I totally sympathize. If you've been spending so many years working on Half-Life related content, I see why you'd burn out on it. I was going to mention, because in the original Half-Life, I actually find that both thematically, set piece wise, and level design wise, even if it's not perfect, Surface Tension is probably my favorite chapter in Half-Life, because it's just the situation that progressively gets worse and worse the further you get. And you start to see that the alien forces are getting more aggressive, that the military is no longer becoming your problem, Now it's the aliens that are becoming the military's problem. So you're seeing this big three-way battle start to unfold in front of you. And so I mentioned the Black Mesa remake because I find that game was very consistent in making my love for the surface tension chapter my favorite. And part of that, I think, is because of some of the new set pieces that they added to that, where they didn't just revise a lot of the old ones or change some layouts of a few areas to make more sense in context. There's this one scene where you can watch, like, you go up this ruined tower and you open a door. You're on, like, the second story of this tower next to a radio, and you're just seeing a bunch of grunts fighting a bunch of the alien life forms. Then this tank rolls in right in front of you and starts firing off at all the aliens. Now the military looks like they have this advantage. And then a few seconds later, you see one of those giant manta rays start soaring in, and it starts firing off this beam that begins to devastate everything in front of its path. And you just hear the radio chatter of all the guys like, ah, they're freaking out, and then the tank gets blown up. You don't have to shoot anybody in that. You can just watch all of the sequences unfold in front of you, and that's just one of the most interesting things I've ever seen in a video game, because I didn't feel like I had to actually be shooting to kind of appreciate the moment of the game just showing me this event that was going on, making you feel like you're the most insignificant part of this greater conflict happening in front of you. Um,
Yeah, I
and I
realized.
think that
Uh,
surface tension in the Black Mesa remake does the interior sections a good service as well. Because again, it's one of those things where it is kind of resetting your brain every now and then, so it makes the outdoor segments feel a lot more massive in scale.
yeah, I think it might go back. Yeah, it might be a little more complicated because it might go back to what you said about context. Because I realized, like in Half Life, I did enjoy like might have been the on a rail section where you just have this rail that's just kind of going off into the darkness, and it's just see stuff like that creates a sense of intrigue to me. Like, oh, where is this going? Or you mentioned the subway
Hmm.
tunnels and Deus Ex. Like, oh, I'm kind of curious, like how far this goes, or um, with indoor or with fear. That's just a bunch of mundane areas. But when I was playing, I didn't know how. Like, you're the whole game. You're trying to get your bearings on what exactly is happening here.
Hmm.
You're just some grunt going in. With SWAT. Yeah, I mean, you mentioned you watched Civi's video. Civi's giving spoilers like in the first couple minutes, so you didn't really get the right tone from that if you haven't played it. I mean, if you weren't planning, this is something I do. A tip for anybody watching: if there's a game you intend on playing and you want the full experience, maybe you shouldn't watch somebody else's video on it. You should watch the videos of ones you're not going to play or you have played, or because it's better to get that kind of full impact, in my opinion. But with fear, there's a lot of mysteriousness going on. So that by progressing further in this building, it's like, oh, maybe I'm going to get more clues or find out what's happening, or it kind of makes the world real in a sense in my brain. But well, let me ask you. I've made it known, especially in the Killing Time episode, that I'm not a fan of the just real kind of abstract. You talked about realism. It doesn't have to be realism exactly, but sort of recognition of what I'm looking at, I guess. Do you have an attitude on levels that are more abstract, like old school 90s stuff where it was almost just like a maze where you were going through and then shooters would come out, versus ones that look like they're set in a real place, or something in between where it's kind of exaggerated in a lot of areas, but you can still make out what it's supposed to be? Do you have a preference for those, or any
Well,
opinions?
to jump straight to an answer, I've got a few caveats that go with this, but I definitely say, and this is where I kind of want to bring up what I would call like the sliding scale of level design complexity here. Um, where you have games which are a little bit more action-oriented base versus immersive sim design. Um, and I'd say that period where you had games like Half-Life, Deus Ex, Sin, and I guess technically we could count the early version of Duke Nukem Forever, like the 2001 build that they were showing
I
off,
still
which
haven't seen
fans have actually been
the new
recreating
old
recently.
released whatever original
Yeah,
OG
the
Duke
Duke
Nukem
Nukem
Forever. Yeah,
Forever restoration build that a
2001.
bunch of
Yeah,
fans have gotten together and they've started
I
to,
need to check
well,
that
basically
out.
build an entire game out of it. I like that era of first-person shooters because it's finding this balance between giving you a lot of environment interactivity and making the world feel real with still at the time a lot of primitive shapes, especially with how limited the tech was. If you made an office in something like the Hammer editor and you put that into Half-Life, there's something that's uniquely charming about that
Yeah,
I don't think modern games can actually really replicate. If you see an office inside an Unreal Engine game, it's just an office inside of an Unreal Engine game. Like you know everything to expect. It looks as technically accurate and impressive as possible, but it doesn't really have the same visual or artistic charm. And this is where I go off and say that a lot of the older first person shooters kind of end up having this accidental art style strictly because of the graphical limitations of the time that lend towards creating their unique visual look. Um,
I
and
think.
I'd say that.
Oh,
Sorry, go
go
ahead.
ahead. There's some lag time, so I don't mean to. Go ahead. I wasn't trying to cut you off.
I think that in terms of the more abstract styles of games, even the first Quake game, I think, has a lot of charm just because they realized that they had this new tech over at id Software where they could do these full 3D environments. So they could do things that looked a lot more realistic than Doom. The level design had to be cut down and smaller compared to some of the Doom stages because of memory limitations at the time. So you ended up creating a lot of vignettes, basically, out of the Quake maps. But one of the things that I really like is that despite them being fairly abstract in nature at times, that kind of lends itself to the game's strengths because the entire theme of the game is this sort of otherworldly, other dimensional horror, Lovecraftian style or H.R. Geiger, where it all feels very bizarre and you're kind of delving into this very dark and sinister realm. And it's just got so many moving parts with what they do with all of the brushes. So you have like the elevators, the nail traps, and they're just still trying to pull so many tricks off inside these really weird places, but it never feels incorrect. It feels like it makes sense for the game. Quake 2, when that came along, I think that it does have very solid level design. And I don't want to go on too much of a tangent here, but does anyone else ever experience a problem where they feel like they're getting lost in some of Quake 2's maps, despite the level design actually being very competent and intelligently designed? And
Not
I feel like
just.
that this is a side effect of what I call the Quake 2 brain rot settling in, where because it's such a simple action shooter, that you kind of start to lose other motor functions the longer you play.
Yeah. Well, what you described is how I feel about a lot of 90s first person shooters, actually, where I get lost. No, I think there's something valid about like having its own style because I think what might be happening is because not everything is so well defined, your brains might be filling in parts of it for you. So it can kind of get into, especially when you think back of it in terms of memory, it can get a little more dreamlike with like your imagination filling it in. So that might
Mhm.
have like an actual legitimate reason for that. That's more than just nostalgia. And I have to say, I've experienced this on another level with running mods to be able to go through some of these games in VR. Well, I mean, not entire VR, but it's basically like it's 3D in front of me. I replayed all of Kingpin like that, and I was actually
Mhm.
floored how good that looked. That was a Quake 2 engine game. That one really had a mood to it, and just seeing it actually in 3D, it's like such a high point for me. Like games actually going through stuff that you're familiar with, and then seeing it like you're actually there. Um, the I had another thought. But yeah, I don't. Well, okay. I think I saw this on the email that you mentioned when you were mentioning aesthetics and you like games with or maybe you or you're saying part of the Serious Sam community wanted more like kind of a verticality element to it, not just like a flat area that you're approaching things. I was trying to
A
think.
little bit of variance, I think, would be helpful, definitely.
Well, one of the I wasn't that impressed by the. It just felt so to me as a game, but like the map design, like my jaw was dropping looking at it. Have you tried out Destiny 2?
I have not,
Okay,
no.
well, it is a more modern one, but I think it's still free. I played it free. I don't know what the and they're always screwing with it. So maybe the levels I played you can't play now, for all I know.
Oh, that
But
would be
I
unfortunate.
would I would absolutely recommend taking a look at that from a level design perspective. Like I can't imagine that wouldn't at least give you ideas looking at it. Again, the gameplay it felt pretty so to me, which might be heresy for some watching this, but I it's some of the more gorgeous levels I've seen, and it has like some of the levels have more of a verticality element to them, and where you're descending and then you go through tunnels that kind of connect to different places and that sort of thing.
Hmm.
But I'm just going from memory now. I'm trying. Yeah, that's actually my main. That's actually might be my only kind of complaint about not all of them, but many of the sort of new boomer shooters or retro shooters is they do a lot of them will copy that kind of like abstract element of it, and for some reason my brain doesn't mesh with that. I am fun. I need like a little more grounding. It doesn't because on the flip side, it's not a first person shooter, but I don't know if you saw the episode I did on Echo, but that one had
Hmm.
that level. I mean, that was surreal, the levels in that, but that one worked for me. I didn't feel like I was really getting lost. It felt kind of like it was a real place, and I don't know what. Maybe it's just like with the layout, it has everything because a lot of the older games, they're kind of centered around okay, find the red key, now find the blue key or the yellow key, and then that has you kind of snaking back and getting lost. Whereas if you're just kind of moving forward in the abstract element, maybe it works with my brain better. I don't know.
Hmm. That'd be an interesting thing to discuss because I do remember seeing that episode vaguely before, and I remember the abstract world design and how it feels like the whole, I guess, palace, for lack of a better
Yeah,
term,
yeah,
it begins to turn itself against the player character. And um, yeah, I guess the abstract element, maybe it's because it's a more realistic looking game that's trying to do abstraction,
oh
which
yeah,
is probably what's causing the opposite effect for you. Whereas if it's the old kind of abstraction where it's a lot of simple shapes, this is a lot of elaborate shapes that are built into something that doesn't feel worldly. It feels very uncanny. Um, if there's one game that I can give a frame of reference that I have played recently, which was definitely, I think it's one of the strongest definitions of an uncanny shooter I've ever played. It's called Ill Will. It released a couple of months ago, and it was actually designed by
it might be on my
a
list.
former
I'm not
Serious
sure.
Sam modder. It's built on the Unreal Engine, so it's got this deliberately, I don't know if I would call it low poly, but very geometric styled, shaped uh, levels, environments, objects, weapons, enemies, and what have you. The best comparison I can make is that it's a little bit like Deep Rock Galactic, um,
Oh, okay.
visually.
Oh wow, no, this looks awesome from the screenshots. I'm not. I hadn't even heard of
Gameplay,
this one. Thank you. I realized I was thinking of Ill Bleed or I'll Bleed. I think that was another much
uh-huh.
older game, but the screenshots look awesome. I'll have
Okay,
to look into this.
I won't spoil anything on the game
Yeah, I'll add
for
this
you
to
if
my
you intend to
list.
play it, but I will say that it hits this really uncanny vibe to it that I find very strangely attractive. Uh, because it's very cartoonish and just kind of so out there, it feels like that nothing in the game makes sense, but that's kind of the point, which I don't know if I've ever played a game that's very much like that, especially since gameplay-wise, I found that it was just fine. Like everything works and everything it kind of feels punchy, but it's a game that I did find I had to take a few breaks on every now and then.
Well, let me ask: is there terminology for this sort of thing where, oops, someone maybe I accidentally froze the chat again. Um, where, see, just the quick screenshots to look at that now, it looks kind of like what I would describe as more like imaginative or surreal. Whereas, like, okay, like on one end of the spectrum, you have stuff that's trying to be realistic, like a real place. Like you could, even
Mhm.
if it's with primitive graphics, like I pointed that out in Killing Time, how okay, this looks like a real courtyard, or Deus Ex, they're trying their best to look like an office, or
Mhm.
uh, industrial facility, and then as with more modern games, they look much more like it. Or and then on the see what you're describing there with the ill will, that one looks more like surreal, where you can kind of tell that okay, this is supposed to be a fountain, this is supposed to be a building, but things are distorted and it's different. And then on the other,
Mhm.
and then somewhere else on the spectrum, like I might disagree with you on Quake. I mean, that's certainly an interpretation that makes sense, but that wasn't the feeling I got from it. It just felt kind of random to
Mhm.
me. Or have you played or seen footage of Marathon? That's another one that was like very maze-like for me.
I
But
have not,
okay,
no.
okay, but you know what I'm talking about though. Like especially lots of Doom levels are like this, where
Mhm.
it's like yeah, you have a corridor, but then it just it's not really meshing with anything architecturally in reality. It's not that it's like exaggerated. It's just that it almost feels like it was computer generated. Like okay, go right here, go up this ramp, and like it just feels kind of like a bit of madness to me. Is there a
Mhm.
terminology for this kind of like game design, level design, where one of them's realistic, one's I'm calling it surreal, where it's taking lots of liberty. You can still identify things, but it's taking lots of liberties with what it's doing. And then the others where it's just almost like random, like or at least that's
Mhm.
how I'm interpreting it.
Well, I'm not sure if I would really have a term for that per se, but this does kind of lead into, with a lot of the things that we've been talking about, we get to this point now where games are so realistic, and the question that I had on my mind when I reached out to you was, I'll frame with the question first, and then I'll try to add a couple of things to that to give you a little bit more context, which is, do we feel as though that first-person shooters, the more realistic they've become, the less imaginative the level design feels? The reason I bring this up is because when we look at older games that have a lot more simple meshwork or brushwork technology, but we could see the effort being put in by the developers at the time, who, for all we know, they were trying to make the most realistic game looking possible back then. So that's why if you have these locations inside these older games from the early 2000s or late 90s, where you could see they're trying to build an office or they're trying to build the science lab with all of these more elaborate looking devices and shapes. And it's not detrimental towards the gameplay or the environment. It's not feeling cluttered. It doesn't feel like it's a visual overload. It feels very distinct and unique. And this is why it feels like a lot of the older games end up having these accidental art styles to them, because that's what their interpretation of something realistic was at the time, strictly because that was all that they had to work with. Like if Half-Life was the pinnacle of realistic by the time it released, it should be said that we've lost some element in level design, I think. And I think what a lot of these retro styled first person shooters, these boomer shooters, are going after is they're trying to pursue the same ends that a lot of developers did back then by artificially limiting themselves, not necessarily to the same extremes, because we've learned more about game and level design since then. But I think of games like Dusk as an example, which really popularized and shot forward this entire subculture, or at least contributed to that effect, where because it's very much designed in the as a kind of a tribute to Quake, but it's got a lot of these
Quake-ish.
realistic looking environments that you can point out and distinguish between every level in the game as a place that feels kind of realistic in Dusk. And then it starts to get more and more surreal and toy with your expectations the further you go, to the point where it doesn't even feel real anymore. It feels
Yeah,
very
I was gonna say I
dreamlike.
like the earlier parts of Dusk a lot more. So, I mean, it's just I was almost gonna say the boomer shooters can kind of overcorrect for what you're talking about. I mean, I don't.
Yeah,
I mean, I don't know. I think there's a lot
I'm not
of.
saying that they're doing a perfect job, mind you, when I say this. I'm saying that I think that's what they're trying to pursue, but they're not quite, most of them anyway, are not quite achieving that. So far, the closest thing I could say is kind of achieving the kind of first-person shooter I want to see more of, just based off of the trailer footage, is that sequel to Ion Fury. I
Oh
think
yeah, yeah,
I posted the trailer in your chat of Phantom Fury. That's the one where Blade from Sin
yeah.
is
I'm
going to
gonna
be
have to try it out
cameoing,
because of
apparently.
that. Because it's a big fan.
I'm genuinely looking forward to that game, despite not playing Ion Fury, because, well, it's a build engine styled shooter. And as I mentioned before, I'm a little bit visually averse to those,
Well,
unfortunately.
I'm fine with that, but I found those can kind of do the same thing. Those are like half and half for me. The build engine games or no, it's almost something different. I mean, I mean, I've played Duke Nukem 3D and some of Blood, but
Hmm.
Blood I remember being more abstract. It's almost like I don't know. They would look kind of realistic, but it's like I don't know. I just didn't really like the layout and the flow of it. I don't know how to explain it other than that. I, I mean, I haven't played Iron Fury though, but the screenshots I saw looked like they were trying to go through that kind of. So that's the thing. Like even within the '90s, you have to me something like the level layout of something like Sin is totally different from something like Quake 2, like in my mind,
Hmm.
and that's the same engine. So it's like I feel like maybe in the '90s you really had that divergence of like the attitudes towards it. Uh, and again, like what Kingpin is another one. Kingpin, yeah, yeah, it sort of feels like half. No, no, it feels more like on the realistic side of things from what I remember. But
Hmm.
I don't know. But I mean, I can. You say like we sort of lost that. I'm not necessarily convinced of that. It's just that we might have to kind of look some more. I'm trying to think of. I pulled up like a list of more modern games that have that aren't necessarily the most realistic, but then have a. Well, okay. I
Well,
didn't think. Go ahead.
here's a little experiment that I want to run.
Sure.
Because if you think of an older game that tries a very mundane environment but has a lot of charm to the way it's designed and laid out, do you think that there are any modern games that stand out to you that are able to achieve that same thing in that mundane environment? Like let's use Sin as an example. If you're going through a place like a warehouse, for instance, where a warehouse is the most basic style of
Yeah.
level that you could put in a first-person shooter because it's a bunch of boxes. But what you do with the foundation and the creative elements that you throw into that is what matters the most. And all the moving parts that you put into that. Do you think that any game that's more modern kind of stands out to you in the same respect that something like a level from Sid would stand out to you, with just that very straightforward, kind of drab environment, but it feels interesting to explore?
It's not. I don't know if you would call it first-person shooter exactly, but the overwhelming, the first thing that comes to mind when you mention that would be the Mirror's Edge games, because those do go for a real minimalist style, but then they have like high quality textures, so it's nice and shiny and sharp resolution, and especially the or prequel, I guess, Catalyst, I found myself really finding that kind of fascinating. I mean, it's not exactly the same feeling as what you're describing, but that's uh, it has they're going for like a very minimal kind of texture definition, I guess is the way to describe it,
Hmm.
without being actual like flat shaded or something. Uh, sorry, could you repeat part of your question? I'm trying to think of like other examples. That was
Which part would you?
the okay.
Does it have to do with like?
What exactly is it you're looking for? You're trying to find an example of in a modern game that Watson does.
I'm trying to find an example of doing an environment that's very basic, ordinary, mundane, and making it feel exciting in a modern
Oh,
game
okay.
compared to the likes of a classic shooter where it feels exciting, but kind of for different reasons, because it's not quite at the level of being realistic artistically or environmentally, but somehow there's something about that in these older first-person shooters that's really good at bringing you into the experience and making you feel as though that world is tangible, if
I
that makes
think
sense at all.
I I think I know what you're talking about. For me, it's for different reasons. With older games that have that kind of more, limited style, for me, it's a bit. Well, I have this with a lot of games where it's more of a Wild West situation where I don't necessarily know what to expect. Where I know this game was put together probably by a small team, so they could kind of make up their own rules. So I'm kind of going. It's kind of more a sense of discovery than something that's super polished and has been play tested, probably thousands of times before it got to in my hands, that sort of thing.
Hmm.
Ah, I'm looking, I'm looking through the list
Oh,
of
I see
games I own.
someone mentioned Prey 2017, and I have yet to play that game, but I've kept myself in the dark on that.
Yeah, you probably should. Yeah, you don't
I
want to
would like
spoil.
to check that out
I
at
had
some
trouble
point.
getting into that one, but that one might have been an example of like the tinning throwing me off. But that's a decent example that they brought up, like especially if you like it, because that does have kind of a plain layout, but there is it does have its own vibe.
Hmm.
Okay, so yeah, so the question is modern graphics. They're throwing lots of detail at, but it's relatively mundane or ordinary environment, but they still create a sense of fascination.
Hmm.
Again, I'd have to say Mirror's Edge, but I'm looking through my list here to see what else. I mean, this prequel wasn't that long ago. I mean, maybe the chat will think of something. I'm just scrolling through like games I have. No, no, that is an
Yeah, I'm
interesting
looking at
test.
the chat's responses.
That's yeah, because although part of the issue is I tend to gravitate towards ones that tend to be a little more fantastic, but so I am being kind of wowed by the environment, and I probably play the less of the contemporary one. Oh, I don't know if this would count or not. It's not super modern, but well, okay, no, I guess it has a successor that is a little more modern. I found the game I was noticing here was Brink. That one's kind of set in the near
Hmm.
future though, so it has its kind of own stylized. But the the game the same studio made, Splash Damage, what was it? Dirty Bomb. That's trying for a modern contemporary environment, but I don't know. I found it had a lot of appeal. Some sections I was seeing, and oh, geez, what was the name of the other one? Shoot. Okay, I'm forgetting something else I played that was a little more modern than that. Okay, well, I guess I lost it, but maybe the chat's saying yes.
Seeing a few mentions. Like you have
So somebody's
Brink, like
saying
you
Oni.
mentioned.
Well, Oni was like
Oni.
what 2001 or something like that. Like I don't think that really the environments didn't wow me from Oni. Would I want to say Oni's overwhelming strength was the combat. You have a lot of martial arts going on in that. I mean, if you were to play through
Mention
Oni,
of Shadow Warrior 2013, and yeah, I think that that's one that kind of stands out. I think it does have a bit of an art style advantage to it because it's a very pretty looking game, even if it's not the strongest game I've ever played mechanically. It's one of those games that has a lot of detail, but is really good at drawing you in.
Well, yeah. See, I thought that one might have been a little too over the top, but that one wasn't really my
Hmm.
favorite in terms of the environment, actually. Uh,
Hmm, I get
well,
that.
well, for one that is over the top, and it's another sort of hybrid one. Was it Ghost Runner? But have you looked at that one at all? It's kind of
I have
half shooter,
not.
half intense 3D platformer kind of game. But they're going for kind of a cyberpunk Blade Runner ish kind of environment, so that they are that wouldn't meet the criteria you're describing exactly.
Oh yeah, I see.
But yeah, I remember being kind of wowed by the environment of that. Uh,
Well, cyberpunk is a genre that's definitely taken off over the past couple of years, not just with, well, Cyberpunk 2077 itself, but not like there are a lot of games that are really capitalizing on that particular theme. And that just seems to be one of the trends that we're seeing as of right now that's helping make these more modern looking games stand out more. And I think it's because they're trying to wow you with a lot of lighting techniques, a lot of very pretty looking atmospheric lights. The dystopia aspect, but it's made to look kind of beautiful, I guess.
yeah, I lost what else I was thinking of. Oh well. No, that is an interesting. That yeah, for modern games or modern-ish graphics, you, the I know that I have to feel like there's more out there, uh,
I'm sure there is. And
but you're
I
right, that
think
is
the
kind of
thing
rare,
that's
you know.
at the end of the day is that when you're able to build something that's more realistically scaled in a modern game now, compared to what you could do in an earlier styled first person shooter, um, I think that might be one of the things that can make modern shooters feel a little bit weird to play when you're inside a more simple environment, like you're inside of a basic house, for instance, and you're exploring that. Uh, it doesn't. Scaling, I think, is a big thing that goes into it. And when you have so much clutter that's going on inside of a realistic looking game now, it's kind of toying with your expectations of how comfortable the place is to navigate in and also what you can do in that environment. Like it starts firing off signals in your brain about, can I do anything with any of these objects in this house? Can
Yeah,
I
it might
destroy
draw
any objects?
it might draw your focus in different directions where it's more centered in a.
Yeah, it's kind
Uh,
of like an ADHD simulator almost. Whereas if you're inside of an older game, you know what it is you're looking for when you're inside of a house, and you can see a couple of things that help make that place look like a house, and it kind
okay,
of
well,
feels
I
like a
have
house.
one. I
And so it
think
just does like enough of a job, so you know, yeah, this is a house. Like this is a cozy spot.
I
It's
have
got a
one I think
fireplace over
matches
there.
what you're describing. It is a science fiction environment, but I don't have problems figuring out where the enemies are, where should go. Unconventional one, but
Hmm.
Planet Side 2. That one has modern-ish graphics, and you have bases, but there'll be steps into them. You can see where the exits are. You can kind of get a feel for where you should go. I mean, it's designed for a massive multiplayer environment, so it is kind of more
Oh
open
yeah, I
and
see.
sparse. But I'd say the design of that does draw your focus towards the shooting. It just very pretty graphics, but it does. There's you're not gonna get well. I don't think you're gonna get too distracted about where should I go, where the enemies are. That's where you're gonna and
Hmm.
not get overly lost from the bases and the landscape and that sort of thing. But that's I mean that's not a normal kind of first person shooter, but it's I think that fits that what you're describing. Uh,
Hmm.
yeah, no, you're right. That element is kind of rare, like modern graphics, but and like a normal setting, but just the setting in itself gives like a kind of like very nice atmosphere on its own without I mean just from the layout.
Hmm.
No, that is an interesting test. I hadn't thought of that.
Yeah, that's a major part that's just been sticking me with for a long time now. And it's part of what I think might be informing my desire on the kinds of levels that I'd like to do for original level design. I think some of that just has to do with not only the primitive influence of older first-person shooters, but this idea that one of the best ways we could probably replicate the original magic of that experience is by giving ourselves these artificial limitations on how much we could do architecturally and structurally without making the game feel too basic or too surreal to the point where it feels too gamey, if that makes sense at
Yeah,
all.
though I
Like
really
there's
think
definitely there's an art form to this somewhere, and this is where I would kind of draw the distinction between art direction and art style. Like I've used the two terms interchangeably before, but I'm starting to think that maybe these should be classified as separate terms for what I'm talking about now. Art direction is kind of what drives you towards making the kind of game that you want to make. Like for Quake 2, we want to make a game that takes place on another planet that's filled with these alien tech bases, these sinister alien monsters that are like half humans and half cyborgs, and they're all bloody and they're fused together. That's kind of the art direction, and the art style is what's produced out of that. With the graphics that you have at the time. In this case, their art style was this is realistic for the time, so we're going to go for the most realistic that we can out of this. So now we come to this interesting crossroads where, for retro styled FPS shooters, I think what a lot of developers are doing is they're setting themselves the goal to try and make something look primitive, but in some cases, they're creating a very weird mixture where they want to make something that looks primitive, but they also want to have it look very smooth and clean, and they also wanted to have the most advanced graphical effects and particles, texture mapping, and what have you, or they'll just artificially blur it and make it feel kind of bizarre. It doesn't feel right because then it looks like it's a game that's lost out of time. It's not from any specific time period necessarily. It's obviously trying to replicate and reach something visually, but something doesn't feel right because it's not what we expect out of a game that looks like that.
well that's what that Iron Fury sequel is going to do. That where they're going for basically kind of really smooth PlayStation 2 level graphics, but no bilinear filtering. So everything is like square with the textures.
Yeah.
You can see all the
Did I
texel.
say FPS shooters?
Yeah, yeah.
Oops.
You can see all the texels. Well, yeah, no. No, what I was thinking though, it's. I mean, yeah, it's. We're getting to the realm of like I'm not sure how exactly you go about that, but it is a real thing because I was thinking of the comparison of like the levels of Doom versus maybe 2/3 of the levels of Strife. Where Strife you have
Hmm.
towns in the Doom engine, and like yeah, it is. There are definitely limitations going on, but it meshes pretty well in my brain. Whereas when I'm in endless corridors, I'm just like, I
Yeah,
don't.
because Strife is putting in the effort to make it feel like a realistic place using the technology that it had access to at the time. So if you create a tavern or a bar and you walk in there, those little details matter so much for a game that is using the Doom engine. And that's, I think that's Strife is actually a really good example of a Doom shooter that does something much more ambitious to a very I don't know how successful you would call it. Like how popular was Strife when it did come
Not
out?
that
Because I think
popular.
that it was
No,
kind of
it
this
was kind
underground
of
hit
cult classic.
almost.
It was kind of cult classic territory. It wasn't.
Hmm.
I mean, for put it like this: for all I know, I'd have to check. For all I know, I've done the most popular video on Strife, so that should tell
Yeah,
you
I
how
think you
big
have.
it's not.
But isn't
Uh,
it interesting how, for a game like Strife, if you wanted to do a full 3D remake of that, or just keep it on, say, let's just say, for instance, you wanted to do it on like the Quake 2 engine, but you wanted to make sure that it still remained distinct and like had all those elements that really made it stand out for you. It's still got those realistic settings, but it's obviously still trying its best to draw you in, even using those limitations. You could probably remake a game like Strife in full 3D. You cannot remake a game like Doom, like the original Doom in full 3D, and expect it to not hit that super extreme uncanny valley territory. I don't think.
Well, I don't know. I still need to play it, but it sounds, from what I've seen of the footage, it looks like the gold standard for that sort of thing. If you were trying to aim in between and remake a game, would be the new System Shock remake, where it
Hmm.
looks like they were trying to be very faithful to the original, but like update things where they could. Uh, I mean, if you haven't seen footage, for sure check that out. That looks like, again, I might be calling it too early, but like I intend to play it. But from what I've seen, it looks like you couldn't ask for better. Where it's like, okay, we're gonna push it up to the level we're comfortable with, and if we go past that, we're probably gonna lose the mood. So we'll go to that level. So, well, somebody's
Hmm.
saying Black Mesa like remakes it. But I guess, yeah. I mean, it gets tricky trying to like recreate kind of magic, but maybe it's a similar design process for games that aren't even remakes. They're just trying to go for that style of,
Well, the strength of Black Mesa is that it never really lost that sense of scope that the original Half-Life set out to create. So even if Half-Life 1 has a lot of these very weird liminal spaces in retrospect, Black Mesa does a good job at taking the concepts of those and transforming them into something that feels believable and realistic, but it's not to the degree that it feels unspecial or kind of mundane. Like it still has that stupid giant fan that's in the middle of a shaft that doesn't make sense at all, but it's still there in the game, and you still ride up the wind current after you turn it on, which just gives this fun spectacle to the entire level design there. So I think they kept that pretty much intact for the
well,
remake.
I guess I'm not a huge fan of either one, but from what I've seen of the Rise of the Triad remake, that one also looks like it. Whatever the original was trying to do, it looked like it had it similar. I saw some of Civi 11's video on that. I was
Yeah,
thinking, man,
I've
I
seen
wouldn't want to
that
play
one
either
too.
one of these, but well, I mean, I played some of the demo when I was younger of the original, but I like the action, but everything else wasn't really my style. So, uh,
Hmm.
well, are there more?
Yeah, that
I was gonna say, are there more topics on your itinerary you wanted to get to? I wasn't sure.
I I feel as though for the most part, like we've covered a lot of the broad strokes that I wanted to discuss. If there is one more thing that I wanted to cover, and this is more of a Q&A session for both you and the chat, for first-person shooter design, do you prefer the kinds of shooters where you have a good solid mix of gameplay and environment interactivity, even if it's something that doesn't actually affect the gameplay at all, like a light switch. Remember, every build engine game had the interactable light switches. Every Half-Life like inspired shooter had interactable light switches that you could turn on and off. Something as simple as that. Do you like games that have a good even mixture of that and are mostly focused on action, or is there kind of do you prefer the more action based, or do you prefer the like the fully immersive ones that are so grounded and detailed and kind of most of the action comes from just dealing with other enemy humans, for example? Like, what's kind of the gauge that you find you're most comfortable with when you play a
Oh,
first person
I'm
shooter?
a little confused what you're asking, but I'll say like I I, I was gonna say the interactivity, unless I'm drawing a blank on something, that's actually not a huge deal for me. Like having a light switch, so much as I just want to hopefully have a good experience. Like whatever they're handing me, hopefully thought was put into it that it's gonna be fun to play. Because for the more immersive stuff versus the more action stuff, I'm fine with either one. I mean, I love Deus Ex. I like something like Painkiller, which is again, the story's anemic on Painkiller. It's like there's like 5 minutes of cutscenes. There's your story. It's where that is just action, boom, boom. I kind of enjoy both. I mean, I think it helps when I have like a little bit of like intellectual content, like a story to go with it. That definitely enhances the experience for me. But and I'll play the game longer. Whereas if it's just pure action in the environment without any real context, that'll probably be like a much shorter play session for me. I'll probably just want to play it for like 20
Hmm.
minutes or half an hour in chunks. It's sort of a break. Whereas if it has a story and I'm curious, like, oh, what's going to happen in the plot now? Like, well, what's this conspiracy? Then that sort of thing can kind of keep me going much longer. Um, but yeah, I think with the interaction, I mean, this is my opinion. Maybe people have different views on it. I think the interaction level, that was a much bigger deal in the 90s because this is new technology. This is stuff that you couldn't do before, like, well, again, I think one of the flagship titles for that sort of thing was Duke Nukem 3D. It's like, you can play pinball, you can, yeah, turn the light switches, turn on the faucets, flush the toilet. And what I find as a modern gamer is, well, okay, that's neat, but I guess I don't really care about that much. So that's not really why I'm playing the game. However, I do absolutely appreciate the destructiveness level of interaction where you can shoot out
Hmm.
lights. You shoot a window, it shatters. You're seeing wood chips come off. That absolutely does enhance it. That's not like that's not a breaking point for me either way. It's just, but yeah, that helps for sure. So
Yeah, yeah. Let's add on to that because I think that's one of the things that I wanted to drive towards discussion-wise is when the environment interaction actually has a tangible effect on the gameplay, so it feels as though you're actually being given options. Doom did it as early as 1993 with explosive barrels, but we could see that we have games today now where you'll have set pieces where you can tear down like these obstacles, like these barricades in front of you, or sometimes even walls or ceilings, which can then affect how you interact with the enemies in the world. A good solid level design having a foundation where it feels as though that all of these mechanics they're available to you. You could play this in several different ways. You can approach the situation in several different ways, even if the game itself is designed to be linear. It feels as though that what you do inside the world is having an effect around you, and that highly increases the replayability. And so even if you have like the interaction with little things that don't actually make a difference, like being able to flush a toilet, for example, in a lot of the build engine games, it's just a funny thing to have. Like it's just so charming. It makes you go, oh yeah, that's adorable. I
so
like that
so
you can do that in this game, even though it serves no purpose.
well, I guess so. You're talking maybe more about stuff that actually affects like the gameplay for being able to take out an enemy or something like that.
Hmm.
Yeah, I have a few thoughts on that. I realized I definitely don't like that when they're dropping the hints a little too hard. Like Doom, they have the explosive barrels. There's not these big arrows saying, yeah, hey, maybe you should shoot this barrel, or like it's just there and it's an option if the enemy happens to be around next to one of them. Whereas ones where you can tell they're trying so hard to get you to do that, I don't like that because that kind of takes me out of the game. I guess an exception to that is something like, it's not a shooter exactly, but Dark Messiah of Might and Magic. They have lots of areas where that are like on cliff faces, and you can kind of kick the enemies off the cliff or knock them over, and I do like that. That's I love being able to just like negate, especially if it's like a real tough enemy. But again, like they should do it in a way that the level does not funnel me towards doing this. Like, they should
It's
make me at least
presenting it
think it's
simply
my
as an
idea.
option rather than something that it's trying to teach you to deliberately do is basically
Yeah,
what you're
because
getting at.
that takes me out of the experience of feeling like this is like a real world and like I'm getting into like sort of a zone of playing the game. That's reminding me, hey, this is a game. You should do this. It's like, okay, thanks. Before I saw this, I was thinking about, oh, which enemies are coming next, or what's at the end of this road. That was more of a thought place that I wanted to be. But the what the shoot, I have one more thought on it. With the oh yeah, but on the other side, I don't mind that if it's so over the top, it's kind of hilarious. Well, I mean, one example I was thinking of was in actually Sin episodes where they had this kind of mechanical arm swinging around that was going wild, and it's like, yeah, I want to see that thing slam into the enemies, or and so if it's like really over the top, and especially if you can hear the enemies like freaking out over it, that's kind of another nice touch. Oh yeah, but you talk about replayability even for a linear game. To me, it doesn't really have to be the environmental layout of it or the interactivity so much as you don't know exactly how this fight's going to play out. So maybe you could almost do the same thing by having it. Well, actually, Sin episodes did something interesting like that, where they would try to dynamically adjust to the difficulty of how well you were doing. So, yeah, like
Mhm.
one thing, if you were getting a lot of headshots in, more enemies would show up wearing helmets, that sort of thing. Or
Oh yeah.
if you're just mowing down people, then they're going to send a lot more enemies after you. I thought that was a good idea. I mean, it had some rough execution of it, but that's a good concept. So if I play it the first time, maybe it's enemies with pistols and a couple of them spread out, but I get it. But let's say I play it a second time. This time there's twice as many enemies. Some of them have shotguns, and then they're trying to circle me. Well, that fight's going to play out very differently than it went the first time, and so it doesn't even have to be an environment, just how it's spawning and how the AI works and like what stats you're giving these different enemies or what types of enemies, that sort of thing. And that can
Hmm.
make the fight, I think that can help replayability a bunch, because that can make the fight feel very different, depending on how it's going.
Yeah, it's less about going into the exact same situation as it is originally scripted, but more so what you want to see is an element of dynamic gameplay here, where the game is automatically adjusting for how you're playing, which I think is one of those things that would be difficult to implement, but would be very amazing to see it pulled off more, like in the example you've given, where it's accounting for the playstyle that you've adopted, like going for headshots the most, and then suddenly you're starting to encounter more enemies that are trying to protect their weak points, like the head.
Yeah, or you could
That's
have something
fascinating.
where if you're using a shotgun a bunch, it'll throw more close quarters fights at you, and you won't have so many
Hmm.
like long distance ones or something like that. Or maybe if you're sniping a bunch, you could do the reverse. Or yeah, I mean, they were trying to do it in Sin episodes. I don't know if that's how much that sort of thing has been done since then, though. It's almost like we get these like peaks of brilliance sometimes, and they just fizzle out. Like never again. Like, see,
Well, you know what they said about like the developers of Sin, like you had pointed out in your video, they tried their hardest to out Valve 2 weeks before Half-Life released. They definitely did manage to out Valve. Like I think I saw this in the comments section. Not only did they add more valves to Sin compared to Half-Life 1, but they
yeah.
only made one episode and then they gave up after that.
Oh, I
Not
didn't even
gave
think
up,
of
but
that.
you
Yeah.
get what I mean, right?
Yeah, that one stings, man. It's gonna be 9 episodes,
It does.
or
That's so unfortunate.
because you don't expect the absolute best to be like in the very beginning parts. You expect to kind of build
Hmm.
to the really finale or climax stuff. That's well, okay. Yeah, I guess I have another question, since the chat was bringing this up a bit. For
Hmm.
well, okay, here I'll update. You were asking like some of my kind of favorite levels. Well, I didn't get specific levels exactly, but I brought up some overall level design I liked. So for the ones I haven't mentioned already, Uh, for a more modern kind of retro shooter, I kind of like the flow of it. I mean, it didn't blow my mind, but I liked it. It was a strafe, not strife,
Mm.
where it kind of flowed from one level to the next with the environments that you're going through. Another kind of retro themed shooter is Forgive Me, Father, that where they have sprite based enemies, but I felt like it was a pretty solid game. Like well, I think they're working on a sequel too. Uh, for
Oh
older
yeah, I
ones,
see.
I had other issues with it, but I did kind of like the level design of Realms of the Haunting. That was another one I had a video on where it's it's in the era of I mean, I guess there's some overlap between something like that and Killing Time, and it's less of it's another hybrid game where it's half adventure game, half first person shooter, really. But
Oh yeah, I see.
but they had like a mansion. They had a mansion you kind of explore and unlock areas as you go, and some courtyard spots and and an island. I forgot that. Yeah, that I kind of like the
You
and
know, that actually reminds me, you describing that, another game that I had come across on Civi's channel, he had talked about Clive Barker's
I was
Undying.
about to
It
say
sounds
that.
like it's
Yeah,
got a very similar premise to that.
yeah, yeah. Oh, it may as well be like a spiritual successor to it. I mean, yeah, Clive Barker's Undying. I have to replay it again to like think about like the actual level design, but the environments were great. So, and I did like the flow for like 80-90% of it. So, uh, and for us, these are ones where the levels may not have been that great, but I did like the aesthetics. The original Unreal,
Hmm.
Bulletstorm, the first person shooter version of the game Syndicate, and yeah, I mentioned PlanetSide 2 and Bioshock Infinite. For and then I wrote down here games that I felt like were a little bit ahead of the time for just the spaciousness of the level. Were are Judge Dredd versus Death and Chrome is another one. Uh, and then just I don't know how much of this is level design, just more just mechanics, but I find myself I am liking these kind of roguelike first person shooters. Uh, some examples of the ones I played are Bunker Punks, Immortal Redneck, and Mother Gunship.
I was going to ask about Immortal Redneck because I was considering checking that one out at some point.
Yeah, it's one of those where the aesthetics never really got me, but the gameplay won me over, is what it is.
Hmm.
So, yeah, good gameplay. The aesthetics are just kind of like, I don't know, but the gameplay is solid. So, somebody's saying, ew, roguelikes. Well, I don't know. I like
Roguelikes
roguelikes
can't have
where
good level design.
your skill can carry you very far. That's what it is. So if you're great at that genre, you can go like 5-10 times longer than somebody who's not. So
I'm curious to go off of that comment
oh yeah, there was
about
another one,
them not
Positron
having good
X.
level design.
Sorry, go
Because
ahead.
I've not played any FPS roguelikes, but that did get me thinking. I guess part of what makes first-person shooter level design tricky to pull off well is how deliberate everything has to be placed. So if you try to make a roguelike first-person shooter, that's gotta be really challenging to make that engaging from a level design perspective, not
The
just strictly for the gameplay
I
drawing
would
you
say
in.
from a level design perspective, out of all the ones I mentioned, probably Mother Gunship would be the strongest. So,
Hmm.
yeah, maybe Immortal Redneck after that. Bunker Punks, you will not be impressed by the level design. Probably the same for Positron X. That one's not. It's just the shoot. It's just the challenge of seeing like how far can you go. Kind of element of it.
Hmm.
Well, yeah. Okay. So what I wanted to get to, that was my list of games that I hadn't mentioned that I like the design or many elements of the level design, sometimes for different reasons. So what are some of
Hmm.
your favorites? Because some of the chat looks like some of the chat was kind of getting on your case that you haven't played. You need to be playing more first-person shooters if you're gonna be a designer here.
Well, that's kind of what I'm driving towards at this point because I still have a couple of games in my Steam backlog that I have yet to play. And if there's anything I can do to kind of expand my horizons a little bit as I'm going into the design process, that would be really helpful. Because so far, I've kind of listed most of the ones that I really enjoyed. Mainly, I still want to wait and see what comes of Phantom Fury, since that's going to be coming out soon. I have some very I try not to give too high expectations for a lot of games coming out, but that one looks like it's really ticking all the right boxes for what I want to see
Oh,
in
okay.
level design. So I'm hoping that that one's gonna be good. And I guess I do kind of want to explore some of the subgenres of first-person shooters that aren't just action shooter based. Because obviously I've listed my favorites, but I've got ones from Serious Sam, I've got ones from Doom 3, some from Doom 2016. I really like Half-Life and Black Mesa, some from BioShock. And this is not a single player first person shooter, but I figured I'd mention it anyway. I also like a couple of stages from Team Fortress 2, since I played that for a number of years. Uh, the payload stage, where you have to push a bomb towards this cart on a hill called Upward, which is just on this like this giant desert spire that's leading up to this big tech base that you have to drop this bomb into, and it feels like this really fun adventure with all these different branching paths. Um,
Have you played
that's kind of where I'm at right now.
the No One Lives Forever games? Because I
No
remember
one lives forever?
yeah, I remember No One Lives Forever 2 had like a cliff-based one where you're kind of going up. But yeah, you might want to play those. No One Lives Forever 1 and 2. Uh,
I have to
of
check
course,
that
I
out.
think
Let
you
me
should do
see.
more than just watch the video of Fear. We mentioned Painkiller. I'm trying to think of like some other must plays here. Let me pull up my games list again.
Oh, I
See what
see.
jumps out at
Yeah.
me.
No one lives forever. It looks pretty
From a level
interesting.
design perspective, you might want to, for a modern one, you might want to give a look at Deathloop. That's a modern one. It's interesting level design. I don't know if it was my favorite game
There
exactly,
is
but
a more there is a more modern one that I also still have on my backlog, which is Wolfenstein: The Old Blood. I did try playing a Wolfenstein game before. I tried playing Return to Castle Wolfenstein. Sadly, it didn't quite draw me in like I had hoped. So I'm hoping it's going to be different if I try The Old
no.
Blood. That sounds
Okay,
like a interesting one.
my opinion, I think I ended up giving up on the old blood, but I would recommend. What was it? Was it the New Order? Yeah, I don't know how that one holds up from a level design perspective, but yeah, I found the New Order mostly pretty good. But okay, somebody's saying Oil Blood is better than any other Machine Games Wolfenstein. All right, well it didn't draw me in, but I'm looking at more than just the level design. So uh,
Hmm.
or it, my memory is a little hazy on it, but I remember that. Well, this one, yeah, no, I wouldn't call this a must play, but it was kind of interesting. The signal from Tolva, but that's one where you play this kind of robot on a planet where you're going to kind of different valleys and sort of things. But I wouldn't call that a must play. Well, okay, the gameplay was not really my thing, but have you played Bulletstorm?
No, I've not.
I
Not
would okay
familiar with
if
it.
you don't play it, at least look at footage from it. So that
Okay.
one has a lot going on for aesthetics. In fact, I think I've seen someone describe it as the most. It was something like the most luscious game, or the most shooter, or the most succulent shooter, or something like that. The levels are gorgeous in that. Oh, this wasn't my favorite, but this might be more up your alley. You played Hard Reset.
I have seen footage of Hard Reset. I saw the trailer. Like that was the game that Flying Wild Hog did before they did Shadow Warrior. So I might check that one out.
Yeah, that one was like, it was. I played through it. It was just, it was like kind of on the border of what I liked. I don't know if I'd recommend these, but they do the large scale on an interesting level on some of them. At least look at footage of these of Space Hulk, Deathwing, and the other war Necromunda. I forget what the full title is. Those have kind of spectacular set pieces, even though the gameplay was kind of like, I don't know, for me. I'm just kind of going through my list here, ones that I think. Well, I mean, you can. You can. I haven't tried out Dark Tide. That's a Left 4 Dead knockoff. I never really kind of got into that gameplay, but maybe from a. I'm sure there's stuff that would be interesting from a level design perspective. And before
I
that, they
did
did
try.
Vermintide.
I tried Vermintide, not
Yeah,
Dark Tide. It sounds like it's kind of an offshoot of that, to my
it's probably going to
understanding.
be extremely
Um,
similar. Um,
yeah, Vermintide didn't really draw me in too much, even from a multiplayer perspective. I see
yeah.
mentions of Borderlands 2. I did play that years ago in multiplayer. In fact, some of the people I played with are probably in the chat right now. I found that I had a lot more fun with that game in multiplayer. In single player, I don't know. I feel like it would get kind of old for me in single player. In terms of the level design, I do think that it's got some strengths, definitely. I might have to take another look at that, at least analyze what it is that the levels were doing to kind of give that open-ended feel where there's many different ways that you could fight the oncoming enemies.
Well, I mentioned Far Cry 1 and Crisis. Those are both. I I would definitely look at both of those for level design because again, that's one of my favorite styles for the.
Hmm.
I still need to. I guess I'll have to go back and play through it, but Dishonored is one that comes up a bunch. Also, you're probably at least
Oh
familiar
yeah,
with that one.
I've heard a lot of good things about Dishonored and Dishonored 2, definitely. I saw it mentioned in your YouTube announcement comments as well.
Yeah, I should maybe go through and play through it. It's man, I really can be sensitive to like the tinting of the screen and stuff like that. But yeah, I mean, I guess if I was just gonna recommend one, it'd probably be Painkiller still.
I'm also seeing a Star Wars game recommended here,
Oh yeah, shoot.
Jedi Knight 2. I'm understanding that's supposed to be a good one.
Well, that one's third person from what I remember, but well, no, I guess it's both. Eh,
I think it
maybe
gives you the
that might
option.
if you're going for that lo-fi feeling that might give you some of what you're looking for. It's hard to say, but that did remind me something you probably should check out is Aliens versus Predator 1 or 2. I don't know about they made a newer one. I don't know about that one, but that one has an interesting element where you basically have 3 campaigns in it, and the play style is totally different for each one. So you have the
Mhm.
Marines where it's kind of your standard first person shooter. You know, you're going in with guns and you have like a radar detector to try to see where the enemies are going to be coming from. Then you have the Predator, which that's much more of like a stealth operation where it's trying to kind of sneak up on the enemies, kind of pick them off one by one, sort of thing approach to it. And they have like exotic weapons that he uses. And then you have the Alien, which doesn't have range weapons, but it can crawl on walls and go through and go on the ceiling and go through vents and that sort of thing. So, from a level design perspective, you should at least look at that. That's yeah, those have a lot of. That's another one of those where it feels like yeah, we have this like spike in innovation that just. That's happened a
It
lot.
was never returned to ever again.
Yeah, that's happened to like several in different ways to multiple first-person shooters. I feel like, uh, yeah, Alien versus Predator 1 and 2. I would definitely look into that because I mean, just from a gameplay because the levels have to be designed around the different styles. They're going for. I mean, I think if I remember right, there's completely different levels for each campaign. So each one's going to be kind of more
Hmm.
focused on what the abilities are of the one you're playing for. Yeah, and the chat's saying it's all Fortnite now.
Yeah, it's all Fortnite forever.
Yeah, it's all Fortnite.
Fortunately, Epic Games has surrendered to the Fortnite machine, and they're never going to return to Unreal ever again.
Yeah, well, oh yeah, they've even delisted the old ones, which I find boggling.
That
But
was such a bizarre move.
that would
I
be
don't know what to even
like
say in response to that.
that would be like it or Bethesda delisting Quake or something like or Doom or like the old ones. It's like why that's like or Gearbox just shutting down Duke Nukem 3D. It's like that's like your old like your classic flagship game that kind of put you on the map and still has IP recognition. Uh, let's see. Yeah, and well, you were okay. Well, I don't mean to be rehashing stuff, so I should.
You even want modern Epic on Unreal? I don't even know who I want to be designing an Unreal game anymore, to be honest.
Well, have you seen or played the original Unreal?
I've seen the original. Is the sequel supposed to be better? I'm curious to know
Not
about that.
really. The sequel, in my opinion, it's like a so-so game. It's just that they have some impressive like set pieces. So I don't know. Maybe from a level design perspective, there's some going on there, but it's like they have a
I'm
few impressive.
genuinely blind on this series in particular. I just know that I think it was praised more for the tournament games rather
Oh,
than the single
absolutely.
player
But like
experiences.
the original is very atmospheric, and that's another one that has like a mix of levels I really like and levels I hate. Where like the outdoor areas are almost all good from what I remember, and some of the indoor stuff I like the temples I remember liking a lot. But then they'll have these ones where you're wandering a spaceship. I'm getting lost. Everything looks the same. It's like, all right, I've seen this. It's just some of it feels like torture. So Unreal's kind of all over the place in my opinion, but it's kind of unique though. I mean, I have not played many. Honestly, one of my biggest criticisms about Unreal is it's so like kind of beautiful and wondrous in some ways that it doesn't put me in the mood for killing. It's like I just want to kind of explore and have this kind of be like a discovery expedition rather than just like mow down everybody. So
Hmm.
uh,
Somebody mentioned Time Splitters in there as well. It seems like an interesting one.
that one is a. I haven't played it, but that one is a cult classic. I know of. But yeah, you could probably pass on Unreal 2. Let's see. Well, okay, I think the level does. Okay, I think how you're talking about like representing something, like an office with limited technology, but it has a sort of a magic to it. On the
Mhm.
opposite end of the spectrum, where it's data graphics, but nope, it's still kind of ugly. I would say, but the gameplay is interesting and unique. Postal 2, that's one you should maybe take a look at. The level design, it's not great, but the actual gameplay, it's unique. It's that one I'd say is worth looking at.
That's the funny petition man game where
Yeah,
you walk
yeah.
around and tell people to
That
sign your
dude's.
petition.
That was the first game I ever played that made you wait in line. Like, like so. Yeah.
Uh,
If you're talking, hey, that's its strength. Environmental interactivity. There are definitely things going on in that game that you might be able to take some notes from.
it might be fun to check out. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, that's one that kind of stands out in various ways. I mean, I wouldn't call it a great game, but I can't say it's not unique. So it's.
I feel like a lot of people who have played the Postal series have a difficult time saying that Postal maybe for some of the new ones, I don't know, is necessarily a great game series, but it's just because it's just so out there and off the wall. It's like the stereotype of what every politician thinks a first-person shooter is, and so it just runs with that
Oh, it is.
the
Like,
entire
I mean, the
time.
difficulty, like the easiest setting is Lieberman mode, or, but he was the senator who was holding the hearings about banning video games or censoring them, or the, well, it's
That's
not
great.
just that. It's like Postal also gives as much as like a budget studio could a glimmer as to like what if we just break all the rules of like conventional behavior in society. Yeah, and like trying to, it's almost like a little bit of a simulator of that if you want to. So
I like the
it,
comment that it's the South Park of immersive
yeah,
sims. That sounds
yeah,
pretty on point.
that's a great way to put it.
Uh,
Yeah, that's an excellent way to put it. It's a South Park of immersive sim. Yeah. I mean, there are plenty of things you can do in that game that, if you've ever played an immersive sim, wishing you could do even more stuff or more outrageous stuff, then I mean, it can only do so much for being a budget game, but it certainly tried.
mhm.
Well, this game's pretty, in my opinion, it's kind of mundane, but its claim to fame, Red Faction, was that it had a more destructible environment at the time, so you could kind of blow a hole in the wall and like keep blowing holes and kind of make a tunnel a bit. But I don't think it went as far as they were kind of advertising with that.
It looks like a neat game based off of the screenshots I see. I might check that one out.
Oh, which one?
I,
Oh,
I
Red
do have
Faction.
a little list that I'm writing down on the side of games to check out.
Somebody's saying Red
Um,
Faction was amazing. Well, to me, the star of Red Faction is Red Faction Guerrilla, but that one's not a first-person shooter. Uh, but hey, well, this guy's saying it's amazing, so there you go. Maybe you'll see more than I did. Uh, yeah, I'm kind of slowly going back in time as I'm like looking through my list here. Uh, I'm trying to pick ones that kind of stand out or like have something genuinely going for them. Yeah, I guess see what you think of Dark Forces too. Jedi Knight. Uh, it,
mhm.
it's yeah, that did have interesting elements. Like they had this gun where if you basically had like a rocket launcher that was like a sticky bomb, so you would shoot it at an enemy, but there would be a delay and it would stick to them, and then they would run around and it might run towards the other enemies, then explode, and that was kind of neat. Or actually with the force powers, this is one of the very few games I've seen do this. You could get force speed and you could run really fast, but you could run straight into a wall and kill yourself. You're running so fast. How many first-person shooters let you hurt yourself by running into a wall? Not many, but so yeah, it
Is this
had.
one of those super? Is this one of those games that's so ahead of its time they never revisited being able to run into a brick wall
Oh
to
yeah.
kill
Oh,
yourself?
and I remember with the expansion Mysteries of the Sith, they had some. When I look back at it now, I'm thinking, oh wow, that really was overpowered. Like for the multiplayer, they had this one class, the bounty hunter, where he had a freeze gun, and if you hit, it was like a close range shotgun. If you hit somebody a few times with it, they would just freeze in place and they'd just be completely helpless. And you could do that, and they would have this one force ability, force push. So if you were on like this level with lots of cliff faces, like bottomless pits sort of thing, you could freeze them and then just knock them off the cliff, and then they would lose a point on their score from that rather than you getting the kill. But the thing is, there would be a delay. So I think it would freeze them for maybe like maybe it was like 10 seconds or something. So they'd just be there, just frozen, frustrated, they couldn't do anything. And then if you really wanted to mess with them, you could act like you're going to walk off so they're going to be okay, and then turn around, then shove them off the cliff, and then they have to wait more. So that's what I mean. It was a little more Wild West back then. Yeah, stun locking. Yeah, they basically had stun locking as a weapon. That was. Uh, I guess a lot of the older first person shooters I still need to go through. So they're probably ones that'll show up on Civi 11's channel at some point. But yeah, I think between the titles I mentioned, that should give you a lot to work with for
I
ideas of
have a
gameplay.
nice list established here of games that I've yet to play, which seems to have a pretty diverse set of styles going on.
Yeah,
So
mind
that's
telling me some of the
very
other ones you
helpful.
have on there, or mind telling me
Um,
some more titles you have? Maybe I can give
let's
like
see.
lightning round impressions of them if I've played them.
So, No One Lives Forever,
Yeah.
plus possibly the sequel, Bulletstorm, Hard Reset, Painkiller, Wolfenstein: The Old Blood, possibly The New Order, Prey 2017, Crisis, Jedi Knight 2, Alien vs. Predator 2, Postal 2, and Red Faction.
Okay, so those are any that I didn't bring up, I guess. Like you said, you have
Oh,
a
okay. So you must have cut out there. I thought you were looking to hear the list.
yeah.
Um, anything that you hadn't mentioned?
Okay, chat's saying Ultra Kill. Yeah, that's one. I've heard a lot of good things about Ultra Kill. I haven't played that one yet.
Heard of
Uh,
that? From what I saw in the
Proteus, I've
footage
heard
that I
is.
watched, it looked like so hyper and over the top that I think that it just kind of started to turn me off a little bit.
Oh, okay. I've heard Proteus is good too. That's another one I've been meaning to get to.
Yeah, that's the one that's heavily inspired by Doom 2016, but it's all pixelated like classic Doom. It's a very interesting blend of styles.
Yeah, it's. I get. Well, I'm not gonna look at it for the chat, but on accursefarms.com games list, I guess look under. I guess the first person shooters are kind of sharing spots under the action category. So there'll be stuff that's not
Hmm.
first person shooters, but there's plenty of first person shooters in there if you need more suggestions though. I can't.
See someone mentioning Alpha Prime.
Yeah, no, I
Classic.
tried
Good
that one.
one.
I didn't. It was not winning me over. Okay, well, I guess is there more you wanted to cover, or
I think that pretty much goes over all the discussion stuff. Uh, at this point now, I I guess this is going to be my homework for a while. Besides doing a couple more things leading towards developing this game, I'd also have a lot of games that I have to play to study and kind of analyze to see what their strengths are in level design. I don't want to get too caught up in kind of the similar trap that some developers were finding, which was really causing feature creep with some of their games, where it just felt like that the development time was being extended because they're adding too much that other games were doing. I think one of the benefits now is that we're kind of past that point where there's too much more to advance mechanically. Like there's definitely no shortage of potential possibilities, but there are so many ways in which you can design a first-person shooter now based off of a list of so many. It seems like it's easier to just settle on one basic design element and kind of run with it. So I guess now what I'm kind of looking at is after playing these games, trying to find what that one element I want to replicate is and see if I can kind of implement that into the level design I want to create.
yeah, oh geez, I just had a thought then lost it. Oh man. Well, I would say if you don't play it, look at the levels in Destiny 2, like somebody going through them. That
Mhm.
was one. Oh man, I just. Oh yeah, I haven't played it, but it's absolutely one I've been meaning to, and I've heard it's also kind of become a bit of a cult classic. Is Titanfall 2, where apparently that one leans heavily into like a parkour element to it. But
I've
uh,
heard nothing but good things about Titanfall 2. Definitely.
let's see, somebody's promoting AMC Squad, and they're saying it's free standalone. Nothing like any commercial first-person shooter game. Okay. Uh, Jeez, I don't know if I've even heard of that one. Let's see.
Yeah, AMC Squad is pretty much a build engine-esque kind of fantasy epic almost. I
Oh,
don't even think that that term could describe it accurately either. But from what I could tell, it's basically like a big celebration crossover episode of so many different first-person shooters
yeah.
that it kind of exists in a realm like what he was saying, that it couldn't be developed commercially just for what it's trying to do.
Yeah, I'm not really getting a conclusive feel of it from looking at the screenshots, but it kind of seems like yeah, it's giving me a feeling where it doesn't immediately draw me in like the way that what was it, Ill Will did. Like as soon as I saw it, I'm thinking, oh yeah, this looks interesting, but
Hmm.
at the same time, I don't want to be like too quick to dismiss it either. Yeah, yeah, they have a shot of the White House that looks pretty good. But yeah, if build engine games make you sick, I can understand you passing on that. They don't make me sick. It's just it never quite clicked with me with the design, but I don't have an issue with the engine. But I'll probably have to play Ion Fury now just because I want to get up to speed for the sequel. Because I'm going to have to play that with. I hope they lean heavily on Blade, but with. I hope they just have him doing like constant. Because in Sin episodes, he
He
said
should
almost
be your
nothing.
comms guy for the entire game.
That would be amazing. And then like they could have him, get more colorful than he would have in '90s. Just really start dropping f bombs or just really start smack talking. That would be great. Just yeah, just cut the just cut the strings on the censorship and just let's upgrade Blade's smack talking ability to like to the best we can rebuild him.
Well, if it's one of the only things that's keeping him relevant today, I mean, thank God for it, because Sin is a game that did not deserve to
Oh,
be
yeah,
forgotten
it
to time.
stings that episodes got canceled, especially because there was so much more that was probably going to come.
Hmm.
Yeah, I like that world that it had. So. Somebody's saying, "What about Hexen?" I mean, I don't know.
What
Hexen's.
about Hexen?
Yeah, I mean, Hexen is definitely in the maze-like territory where I'm not sure where to go, and it's feeling abstract or like 80% abstract for me. And
It's a game that looks like it's trying to do things that are more realistic than Doom, but it's still caught in this inane style of level design and layout, where it's strictly based around going through mazes to hit switches so you could return to a previous area to enter another maze to hit switches, and you just keep doing that over and over again.
yeah, yeah, I wanted to like Hexen. I mean, I'm totally down with like the different classes and medieval dark fantasy thing. Let's go bash monsters and go to these churches and temples and caves. Yeah, I'm all for that, but man, it's just I really tried. A whole lot of '90s first-person shooters are like that with me. Okay, well, I guess did you want to showcase some of the stuff that you? Oops, if I didn't mess up the. Oh, I might have messed
I
up
can double
the.
check and see if it's formatted right. So you might have a bit of time for that before
Yeah, he
we
had
kind of
some
call the stream
showcase
here.
videos you wanted to show. You wanted to show people, or I
Yeah,
guess,
so
or maybe I should show one and then just I'll have the links to the others when I put this on YouTube. So that could be like one of the first links in the description if you want. Or
yeah, how about you show off since, well, I'm gonna ask you to show off two, but one of them is fairly short anyways. I guess the first thing that I want to show is what I've been working on over the past year as a Serious Sam 3 mod with a couple of other people. I've got my co-author who designed the the Serious Doom mod, which is like this almost like this total conversion that puts Doom 2016 and Doom Eternal game elements and mechanics into Serious Sam. And I have two other Serious Sam modders who have been helping me on the project. Urban Dehuman, who had worked on multiple Sam mods and is a developer for Crow Team now, who worked on
Oh,
Siberian Mayhem. And we also have Spies Creed, who is another Serious Sam modder. Both Urban and Spy are animators as well. And they've done some pretty impressive animation work, so I want to show that off.
oh, and
I guess the first thing, yeah, go ahead.
oh, I was gonna say, since there are a lot of first-person shooters you haven't played, and the crowd was kind of get on your case about that, I have played his mod for Serious Sam 4. It is fleshed out. There's lots of side paths, and he had good ideas with some of the little, not cinematics exactly, but animations or things. So he is a real level designer and has done good work. So, you know, I thought I should put that disclaimer out there for in case people are saying, "Oh, he does. Rod's just interviewing anybody. Doesn't do it." Like, you know. So
Yeah, I'm not quite an original level designer yet. I'm hoping to be. So we're gonna try and get there. The first thing I want to show off is the Medina rework, which if you see what you're going to see in this level is you're going to see a snippet of gameplay from the original level, which is just from Serious Sam 3, a game that released in 2011. So it's been a while since that game dropped, and over the past couple of years of my modding experience, I'd started to get more ambitious with what I wanted to do in terms of level design for Serious Sam, world interactivity, and I just wanted to see how far I could kind of push the engine here. It's been a really fun experiment so far, and I really would like to do more, but I'm also really starting to crave doing something original for once. So I think after this, I'm going to be stepping away from Serious Sam for a while, so that way I can kind of put something that's actually to my name and not just trying to work on what's previously been established by Crow Team. So if you want to show that off,
okay,
then
which one? You
we
gave
could
me
show
like
what's kind of
5
the
different links here.
Medina rework. You'll see kind of the before
Okay,
and
Medina.
after
Okay, good. That's
process
the
that
one I
we've been
have
doing
up
for
here.
this
So,
level.
okay, let's. I realized that I may have messed this up for the framing. So let's see. Oh, okay. That it's almost there. Here. Oh.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. This is about as good as it's gonna get for me on OBS right now. Oh, let me check the volume levels to make sure people don't get blown away. So, okay, it's
Yeah,
gonna
I
be it's gonna be
apologize for
quiet at
the
first, and then
unorthodox framing because I'm recording this on my laptop and it's on an entirely different resolution compared to normal. Does sound like there isn't any sound
oh, there's
happening.
no sound at all.
Oh wait, no, I just have the stream muted. I'm stupid. I wonder why I have the stream muted. That's an interesting question.
It might be a little quiet, but that's okay. I mean, man, this is like, in my opinion, this is like the worst parts of 3 to be using. Like, 3 of me got better as it went. Like, I almost wanted to, because didn't they repurpose this from like a game that fell out that was going to be like some Middle Eastern
So
combat game?
originally, Crow Team was working on a kind of multiplayer sort of co-op. I don't want to say maybe a bit of Call of Duty like. It was an abbreviation game called TEOR. I don't know what it stood for, but it was very heavily Call of Duty Modern Warfare inspired. And originally, they also got a chance to potentially work with id Software to make Doom 4, but they lost that opportunity because of the fact that they would be operating in different time zones. So they took all the material that they had and they created Serious Sam 3 out of it. So definitely the second half of BFE is a lot more memorable compared to
I hate the first
the
chunk
first
of it.
half of the
I
game.
hated these levels, like, and to me, this is just kind of like, it gives me I mean, not your mod obviously, but like this environment just gave me kind of like this blah feeling, like it's. Whereas I like
Yeah.
the stuff out in the desert and later, especially with like the DLC, had like a bit of an oasis, and the later stuff I thought was much better. But this part, I was just like, what happened? What was the first that was my first thought. I mean, oh
It
yeah,
feels very alien and very foreign, very unorthodox
it's
for
not. It's not even that.
Serious
It's just
Sam
kind
at all.
of 2 was alien and 4, and I love 2.
I don't mean alien in the sense of otherworldly.
Yeah,
like,
I
alien
know
as
what you
in this
mean.
is
It's
not
strange.
familiar
Well,
to
it was still
what
kind
we've
of alien and
experienced
4
in Serious
compared to
Sam.
1. 2 was wacky. I mean, it was, but I was on board with that one. I wanted to say, if you know someone working at Protein, tell them to stop making prequels. Make a sequel to 2. like, like, I mean, I understand if they don't want to make it as zany as 2. That's all right. But come on, like, you set us up for just this fascinating universe with 2, and then we're going back to this. And I mean, 4 was better, but. Like
You have no clue how badly I want to see a proper remake of Serious Sam 2 because there's so many ideas there that I want to see fleshed out, treated with like actual seriousness
2's not
rather than be a
perfect,
cartoon.
but 2 I feel like I have a little bit mixed feelings about it. But if I had to pick my favorite overall, it would probably be 2. I feel like 2's the best at not having the worst lows, in my opinion. And it does have some really consistently good highs. Although I feel like the absolute high points are from the other Serious Sam games. But there's a lot of great stuff in 2. Okay, so this is one you've designed the level for?
See, I got a lot more experimental over the past couple of months, and I wanted to change the layout that you be traversing through inside this area. So rather than just have it be a bunch of empty shacks and corridors, I wanted this to feel more like you're kind of snaking around this maze. You can go inside a couple of buildings, and some areas are currently blocked off until you shut off the minigun turrets, but it feels more like there's kind of a purpose to these areas. And so a big challenge for me was trying to fill out this world, and currently the biggest problem is just trying to make sure it's optimized so we don't run into any FPS drops. This has been a criticism towards my content before, and I do not disagree with it in the slightest. I have an issue with over-detailing a lot of the time, so I think when I'm actually going into game development, I'm really going to have to temper my impulsiveness towards putting a lot of small details into the world, just so that way the level design foundation is solid and it's not being held back by there being too many things.
It's hard to say.
I'd say the biggest...
Well, I'd say there's 2 aspects to that. One, if you get good enough, maybe you'll get lucky and it's someone else's job to just optimize. Not even like change your stuff, but just like it's like, okay, we can cut out this wall and you don't even see it. Like, they're going through, like Source Engine games tend to be tuned. I can't even imagine how much optimization has gone into like Valve's games. It's ridiculous. When I see it in the map editor, it's ridiculous.
Oh, certainly.
But the other thing is, that might be shifting, and that might be a skill you might not need in the future. I could be totally off on this, but my understanding is Unreal Engine 5, they have that implementation where you can have, like, they have the automatic level of detail as like part of the engine. So they were putting in like tons of models with just like tens of thousands, maybe even millions of polygons. But like the model itself has that many, but the engine itself was taking care of it. And that sounded like a breakthrough.
Interesting.
To me. So this could be the equivalent of you saying, it's like, well, I really need to learn to write in cursive more because, it could be on its way out, is what I'm saying. So I wouldn't worry. I would say don't worry about that don't worry about that too much, depending on what you're aiming for. Like, I imagine if you could show something that wows people and you can get if you know somebody who has like a 4090 or something to record the footage for you, or you can do something like a cheat with like a demo mode of like Half-Life where you're playing it at 640 by 480, but then you render it out at 1080 with full so you can kind of sidestep the optimization. That might do more to get you a job or in on a team or something than like fine tuning it. I'm again. This unfortunately, this particular footage is probably wasted on me just because I'm biased against this environment. That yeah.
Hmm.
The what? Okay, wait. I should the I don't know. The bar it was just so ugly to me. But the not what you did, but just what the Crow team originally did was
Hmm.
not my favorite. However, I could see you had like there was thought put in this. Okay, go here. This that turns off this turret. Then you go here. So I feel like this would have been much better if it was an environment I liked. But sorry. Well, hey, I already
Yeah,
got to see your work with the Serious Sam format where you had the staking. To me, that's much more impressive than what you had. So, uh, I mean, this from a layman player perspective. This is just one opinion, so don't think. I don't want you to. I know how like individual opinions can kind of like inflate or change your perspective. I just want you to know this is like one vote, from my perspective. That I was more impressed with like the pathways and the little villages you had and then you had like an extra base in on a hill in the Serious Sam 4 mod. What was the name of that one? I get the name of your mod.
a seriously stupid Planet Badass remaster,
Yeah.
which
Okay.
is just it's two levels that we picked out. My co-author Danny S and I, we decided to try to do something more imaginative with those levels. So, A Breakfast in France was the first one that I had tried, and well, personally, I think it's one of the worst things that I've put out. It's not for the lack of trying. I wanted to take the concept of it being like this big open-ended space where you had all these different branching paths and different ways that you could go and just explore this French countryside. So while it's definitely not the strongest thing I've done, I don't really so much hate it for what I attempted to get out of it.
Well, to me, that was way more impressive than yeah. Again, I'm not trying to cut you down, but I'm just saying you were able to
I
build on
totally
the
understand what
strengths.
you're saying.
And yeah, like I discovered one of the secrets not the right way because yeah, there is a secret if you go backwards when you start, you can find this other path which leads to things. I didn't find that. Instead, when I was out on this other farm, I saw there was like a tower in the distance. I was like, well, wait a minute, is that part of? Yeah, there is something there. And so I went and tried to find my way over to that, and then that led me back to the original secret. Yeah, the way I would describe his mod for that is if you take breakfast in France and pretend that's like a straight line, then what you do is the way I describe it, it's almost like a thread weaving in and out of that as you go through it. So there's there's frequently stuff on the side that leads off to things, but then you can kind of make your way back into the main original game. So it was interesting to see. So uh,
Hmm. I guess what I'm trying to get out of it, just based off of my limited experience so far, is trying to build off of Crotein's work and seeing how I could mess around with it. Besides trying to add a couple of new set pieces into projects like the Serious Sam 4 remaster, or just changing the layout or some of the fundamental mechanics or gimmicks in some of the levels for currently the Serious Sam 3 remaster. Uh, it's kind of I'm trying to figure out where my strengths are right now and what I could best be devoting those to for level design in the future. So certainly there's plenty more room for original experimentation. I guess if there's one other thing that you could maybe show off. First, I want to give my animators the floor here and show off what they've been doing. If you could show them the BFE weapons reanimated
okay,
demonstration real quick. I think that
the
definitely deserves some love too,
which one
because a
is
big
it?
part of this project was just trying to make some of the shooting presentation also feel
Did
good,
you put
which
the
is
link for that here, or
largely what. Yeah, go ahead.
where's the link for that?
It's just a bit above in the chat history.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I see it now.
Just keep scrolling up a bit, yeah.
Okay. Copy. Let's see if
Yeah, for
this
this project,
works.
it was kind of two-pronged. We wanted to do something that was both taking on some of the BFE level design and trying to expand upon it or add some new gimmicks to it. We also wanted to make the shooting feel a little bit more, I guess, a little bit more modern, we could call it. So we have the effects updated, and currently we've got Urban and Spy working on reanimating all of the weapons, and so far I think they look great. I think that's gonna really help to draw people in if they try out the mod.
Oops, let's see. Can I shrink? It's a little. Ah. Okay, but close enough.
That's pretty good. I don't have an issue with that, the way it's laid out. So in this video demonstration, they're showing off again, the before and after comparison, so you can get a sense for what Crow Team's original work was and how they've taken those weapons and reimagined kind of the weight and feel to them. So we have a little bit of a funny blend going on in this case, where for these stronger weapons like the sledgehammer or a lot of the heavier ones like C4, they feel a lot more weighty and hefty. Whereas with the other guns that are more tactical, like the basic pistol and the assault rifle, they play a little bit more like a Call of Duty game almost, where they're very tactical and you kind of like the little animation details that go into them.
It's funny you're saying they feel weighty and heavy, and then the animation shows him throwing it as high as like a linebacker for. I mean, like a professional
It's
football player.
unfortunately
You know,
not. The C4 is probably not the most ideal to show the effect off, but you'll have to trust me when I say that the other guns
I
definitely
do
give
believe
off
you.
that impression.
This is the sort of thing that's much more subtle to me. That like, for me personally, I mean, I know some people really care about gun models, but it's,
Hmm.
well, when this finishes, is there anything else you wanted to bring up, or I guess we can just sort of end it after this video, or
I think that this might be a good place to end it off. If there
or if
is
the
one
chat
more
has any
thing that I
questions,
could
that's another
probably
thing.
show off,
Yeah, chat. If you have any
if there's,
questions for us, go ahead and ask them now, because there'll be a delay.
yeah. I think the last thing that I wanted to show is just some of the experiments that I've been doing in Trench Broom as very early work, which
Oops.
is,
Well,
for the
your
time
stream
being, that
froze,
one
but
is,
that's okay.
am I good?
No, but that's I can hear you. You
Yeah,
look
chat,
tired,
I
so
appear to be stuck. Oh well.
is that from? Oh, I
Yeah,
know
you could
why.
probably
I bet
see
I
it
have to
posted
switch
at the
windows
bottom.
again. Is that? Yeah. Okay. That's. Wait. Now you're just disappear. What happened? Oh wow. Oh, God. OBS. All right. So
Oh, yes, crapped on us.
no, it's just yeah. Uh, okay, close enough. So he's asking if all the levels in Series 3 SAM 3 will be remastered in your mod.
Well, that's an eventually thing that I'm gonna have to set aside for now. Um, the hope is that one day I could have this mod complete, but it's definitely not going to be anytime soon. I'd like to go on a hiatus from Serious Sam modding for a while and then expand to something more original. But never say never. Maybe one day I'll be able to spare some time to come back to it and try to do some more things with some of the pre-existing level layouts.
If, in my opinion, if I were you, I would absolutely focus on the more original stuff you have in mind. And if you want to do it, just pick the levels you think are most worthy of a redesign. You know, just pick the ones like, okay, this
Mhm.
idea is really good. Then do that. I wouldn't bother with the whole mod of it. I mean, just my opinion, because if it's especially if you're looking to go to, original stuff. I'd be much more interested in what you would have from original design. And you said you mentioned what are
Mhm.
your strengths? Well, just from my limited exposure on the serious Sam thing, some of the things that stood out to me was I liked having, sort of this side path that kind of leads to a village, and the path keeps going and I'm not sure what's there. I wouldn't
Mhm.
underestimate that element of it where, you have a path going off and you don't know what to expect. And you could have like little, yeah, you had a village and then it snaked around to like this pond area, then be like a lamp post and a little, then like a gated area by a power transformer or something like that. Then
Mhm.
there was like a farm off the dist. Yeah, and I like that secret with the tower, how you could see it from a distance, like giving small little hints of your secret. That's great. That sort of thing was good. The warehouse area, yeah, I say the warehouse. That one was all right. I guess I like the little small paths that were taking me out into the unknown. Was what I liked the most about yours mod.
Mhm.
There was something else though. Oh yeah, I like the little touches how you were showing off more of the airships going by and that sort of thing. So you were kind of like upping the spectacle a little more than what the level originally did. So yeah, I wouldn't. I mean, unless considering how you are going for action, I can't. I'm having difficulty thinking of a game where if they're putting full effort into it, has too much spectacle for me. So yeah, like I
Yeah,
think
there's definitely no shortage of spectacle that I'd like to include in the next project that I want to work on. Obviously, spectacle isn't everything. You have to have some foundational element to it. You need to have good gameplay. You need to have solid level design that's intuitive, that speaks to the player, uh, is interesting and engaging. But you also want to have those little set pieces there to keep the player drawn in and really just immersion is one of those buzzwords that gets thrown around a lot in the games industry, but it's not something that I think you could undervalue in video game development. Because the more that you can convince a player that a world is real and something that you can interact with, the more fun it becomes to go back and look at all the little things that the developers put in. And I hope that for the team that I'm working with, we'll be able to do something very special for players that are kind of looking to scratch that itch. Uh, we want to do something that's kind of like a serious Sam like for sure, but we also want to take some elements from other games around that time period and try to implement them in such a way so that we're not like boxing ourselves into a specific genre and just strictly emulating that, if that makes sense at
yeah,
all.
I wouldn't worry too much. Like I think in my opinion, your metric should just be if a regular person in the shooters plays it, are they having fun? Did they absolutely hate one
Mm.
part, even though that has more variety than maybe? Because I was thinking even two, I hated the sewer level in Serious Sam 2. Uh,
It is the most beautiful looking sewer level, though. Can't deny that.
yeah, I can. I didn't. It felt like such a downgrade compared to the village one, just about every other level in the game. Uh, Yeah, I wouldn't worry.
Fair enough.
I wouldn't try to overthink how much you're matching the genre or not. It's just if having a good time or things to kind of amaze people is the priority, then you're unlikely to go wrong. So,
Mhm.
uh, well, I think I'm gonna go ahead and end it here if that's all right with you.
Yeah,
Well,
this has been a lot of fun. Thanks a lot for having me on, and it was really interesting having this discussion with you. And appreciate the chat being here as well, and all of your opinions and feedbacks.
if
Am I
my
related to Adrian Brody? That's a good question. I'll get back to you on that.
yeah, I saw this come, and I was gonna say if the chat's any indicator, you're probably going to see more than a few comments saying you need to play more first-person shooters. Like
That's the
I
plan.
think you might have come up short with uh, for pressing people on your background on it with for game playing. However, play what I would say is play his mod or look at a playthrough of it and then cast judgment because it looked extremely promising to me. So Uh, in fact, I think my only complaint that I had of it was that I kind of wish it just went off on its own path, like separate from the main level, because there's so much space in Breakfast in France anyway. That I would have liked to just have like nothing but fresh new stuff, and then I think I would have loved it. It's like, oh, okay, I've got to go back to the part I already know. Okay, nothing new's here. It's like, is something new? No, this part isn't new. This part's the original game. So that's kind of what I was doing, but I had already played the originals. So whereas if it was just like one path that just kept going with all that stuff, I think I would have liked it twice as much. So I think I definitely support your decision for having like original stuff, or even if you're using Serious Sam assets, if you're not trying to like modify the original level and are just doing your own thing. Like when I was seeing the demo you had just now, I was thinking that I'll be if we're going to use this war torn area that they repurposed from the beginning, then I would want to see I would want to see you go nuts with it. Like this is like a tunnel in the sky above a smaller city that it doesn't make sense, but it looks real-ish. I was thinking if we have to use it, I would want something like that done with it. But all right, well, I'm not trying to.
Understandable.
Again, I'm just one opinion, so definitely get more feedback from others. Yeah, I think I'm gonna end this here, and yeah, thanks for showing up. I guess there'll be more future interviews in the future.
All right, take care, everyone. Thanks for having me on, Ross. It's been fun.
Sure, and then maybe you'll get offers for Adrian Brody, like look-alike. I know that can be an industry for famous actors, get look-alike.
It suggested to me before I should have been a fashion model, and in some places I do regret not pursuing that, but I guess game design will have to do for now.
Well, for what it's worth, it's pretty competitive. That's what I understand. You probably have a better shot at making it somewhere with game design than you do as a fashion model. Yeah.
I'll take that.
Okay, that's a good place to end it. See ya.